Welcome. Tonight's story takes us back to a quiet town in 1994, to a small apartment on the third floor of an old brick building where the walls held the warmth of 100 years of living. It was the kind of place where you could hear the rain before you saw it, where the sound traveled up through the streets and arrived at your window like a gentle visitor, tapping softly, asking permission to stay a while. I'm going to tell you about a night. One particular night. The night I sat down and wrote a letter I would never send. But to understand that night, we have to go back further. We have to go back to when the world felt wider, when time moved differently, when I didn't yet know what it meant to wait for someone who would never arrive. Let me start there. Let me start at the beginning, when everything was still possible. It's autumn now, as I tell you this. The kind of evening where the air has weight to it, where you can smell the leaves turning, that sweet decay that means the world is preparing to sleep. I'm sitting by my window, and outside, the street is empty. The street lamps have just come on, casting their amber glow across the wet pavement. It rained earlier, and the world has that hushed quality it gets after rain, as if nature itself is catching its breath. There's a candle burning on my desk. Just one, vanilla, I think, though I've had it so long I can barely tell anymore. The flame doesn't flicker, the window is closed, but I watch it anyway, the way it holds its shape, the way it knows exactly what it is. I've made tea, chamomile. It sits beside me in a chipped blue mug I've had since college, the one with the faded bookstore logo that I spin through the dishwasher so many times the letters have nearly disappeared. Steam rises from it in a slow, lazy spiral, and I wrap my hands around the ceramic, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. This is my ritual now, this quiet, this stillness. It wasn't always. There was a time when my evenings were full of noise, not the jarring kind, but the noise of anticipation. The sound of the phone that might ring, the flutter in my chest when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, the way I'd catch myself holding my breath, waiting for a knock that never came. But tonight is different. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about him, about us, about what it means to love someone so completely that you forget where you end and they begin. And then slowly, painfully, to remember yourself again. His name was Daniel, and I loved him the way you love something you think you'll never lose. We met in the spring of 1989. I was 22 years old. Fresh out of college, working at a small independent bookstore on Maple Street, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and coffee, and had a cat that slept in the window display among the staff recommendations. The store was called Chapter and Verse, and it was the kind of place where people came not just to buy books, but to exist for a while, to be somewhere that felt separate from the rush of the world outside. I worked the afternoon shifts mostly, from noon until closing at 8. Mr. Holloway, who owned the place, was a gentleman in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual cardigan, and he'd given me the job because I wandered in one day looking for a copy of Ann Tyler's Breathing Lessons and ended up staying for 3 hours reading in the corner while the afternoon light slanted through the windows. "You have the look of someone who belongs here," he'd said, and a week later, I was working the register. Daniel came in on a Thursday in late April. I remember because Thursdays were always slow, that strange gap between the midweek rush and the weekend browsers. I was restocking the poetry section, Neruda, Bishop, Szymborska, arranging them alphabetically, when I heard the bell above the door chime. I looked up, and there he was, He wasn't extraordinary, not in the way movies teach us to expect. He didn't have a commanding presence or a face that stopped time. But there was something about the way he moved carefully, as if he was aware of the space he took up, as if he was trying not to disturb anything. He wore a brown canvas jacket, slightly worn at the elbows, and his dark hair was a little too long, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than he probably was. He wandered toward the fiction section without looking at me, and I went back to my shelving, though I was aware of him in the way you re-aware of a new sound in a familiar room. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. I finished with the poetry and moved to the front counter, where I began processing a stack of special orders. Outside, the afternoon was turning golden, that particular quality of spring light that makes everything look softer, more forgiving. And then he was standing in front of me, holding a single book. "Just this one," he said, and his voice was quiet, a little hoarse, as if he didn't use it much. I looked down. "The English Patient" by Michael Ondaatje. "Beautiful choice," I said, and I meant it. I'd read it twice already, and each time it had broken me open in different ways. He smiled then, just a little, and something in my chest shifted. "You've read it?" he asked. "Twice. Is it the kind of book you can read twice?" I thought about that, really thought about it, the way I always did when someone asked me about books. "It's the kind of book you have to read twice," I said. "The first time, you're just trying to hold on. The second time, you understand why." He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he'd suspected. I rang him up. His hands were long-fingered, nails clean, but not manicured. The hands of someone who worked with them but took care. He paid in cash, exact change, and as I slipped the book into a brown paper bag, he said, "Do you work here often?" "Every afternoon," I said. "Good," he said. "I'll be back," and he was. He came back the next Thursday, and the Thursday after that. At first, it was just books. He browsed for 20 minutes, sometimes longer, always alone, always quiet. He'd select something, Garcia Marquez, then Colvino, then Raymond Carver, and bring it to the counter, and we'd talk. Brief exchanges, nothing profound. What did I think of magical realism? Had I read any good short stories lately? Did I believe in happy endings? In books or in life? I'd asked him once. "Is there a difference?" He'd replied. I started to anticipate his visits the way you anticipate the change of seasons, not with urgency, but with a quiet awareness, a gentle knowing that something was coming. I found myself thinking about him during the week, wondering what he did, where he lived, whether he read the books he bought or if they piled up on a nightstand somewhere, full of good intentions. It was Mr. Holloway who noticed first. "That young man who comes in on Thursdays," he said one evening as we were closing up. "He has an eye for you." I felt my face flush. "He just likes books?" Mr. Holloway smiled, that knowing smile of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the truth when he saw it. "My dear girl," he said, "he's bought 7 books in 7 weeks, and he hasn't opened a single one in the store. He likes you." I didn't know what to say to that. I went home that night and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, trying to see what Daniel might see. I was ordinary, I thought. Brown hair to my shoulders, usually pulled back in a loose braid. Hazel eyes that couldn't decide if they were green or brown. A scattering of freckles across my nose that I'd always been self-conscious about. I wear simple clothes, jeans, and cotton shirts and cardigans, Mr. Holloway said, made me look bookish in the best way. There was nothing remarkable about me. And yet, the next Thursday, when Daniel came in, I found myself more aware of everything. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the way I smiled when I saw him, the way my voice sounded when I said hello. This time, he didn't go straight to the shelves. He came directly to the counter, and he had a nervous energy about him, subtle but there, like static in the air before a storm. "I have a question," he said. "Okay. Would you ... double quotes," he paused, ran a hand through his hair. "Would you want to get coffee sometime? When you're not working?" My heart did something complicated, a stutter and a leap at once. "Yes," I said. Too quickly probably, but I didn't care. His face broke into a smile then, a real one, not the polite half smile I'd gotten used to. It transformed him completely, made him luminous. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "There's a cafe on 4th Street, the one with the blue awning. Do you know it?" I knew it. Everyone knew it. It was the kind of place where artists and students and insomniacs gathered, where the coffee was strong and the tables were mismatched and the walls were covered in local paintings and flyers for poetry readings. 5 o'clock, I said. Perfect. He left without buying a book that day. I barely slept that night. I lay in my narrow bed in my small apartment, listening to the sounds of the building settling around me, the creak of floorboards from the couple upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator in my tiny kitchen, the distant sound of traffic from the main road a few blocks away. My mind wouldn't quiet. It kept replaying the conversation, his face, the way he'd looked at me when I'd said yes. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal. Just coffee, just two people who liked books, having a conversation. Nothing more, but I knew it was more. I felt it in the way my skin hummed, in the way my thoughts kept circling back to him, in the way the hours until 5 o'clock the next day felt both infinite and impossibly short. I got up finally around 2 in the morning and made myself some tea. I sat at my small kitchen table and looked out the window at the sleeping street below. The moon was nearly full, hanging heavy and bright in a clear sky, casting everything in silver. What did I want? I asked myself that question, really asked it. I wanted to be seen, I realized. I wanted to be known. I'd spent so much of my life feeling like I was on the periphery of things, watching life happen to other people while I remained safely in the margins. I had friends, of course, people I loved. But there was a loneliness in me that I couldn't name, a sense that I was waiting for something to begin. Maybe this was it. Maybe Daniel was the beginning of something. Or maybe I was being foolish, projecting meaning onto a simple coffee date with a stranger who liked books. I didn't know. But sitting there in my kitchen at 2 in the morning with the moon watching and the world asleep, I decided it didn't matter. I would go. I would let myself hope. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to work, to focus on the steady stream of customers, the rhythm of the register, the familiar tasks of shelving and organizing. But time had thickened, become viscous, and every glance at the clock showed that only minutes had passed when it felt like HOURS Mr. Holloway found me in the poetry section at 3 o'clock, rearranging books that didn't need rearranging. Nervous? He asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. That's how you know it matters, he said. The things that don't make us nervous aren't worth having. At 4:30, he sent me home early. Go, he said, shooing me toward the door. Get ready, and remember, just be yourself. That's who he's interested in. I walked home through streets dappled with late afternoon light. The town was small enough that everything was walkable, and I loved this time of day when the world was transitioning from work to evening, when people were heading home or out, when the air itself seemed to relax. My apartment was on the third floor of an old Victorian that had been converted into 4 units. Mine was the smallest, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and the kitchen that opened into a living space barely big enough for a couch and a bookshelf. But it had good light and the rent was cheap and it was mine. I stood in front of my closet for 15 minutes, trying on different combinations of clothes and hating all of them. Too formal, too casual, trying too hard. Finally, I settled on jeans and a soft green sweater that my mother had given me for Christmas, and I left my hair down, loose around my shoulders. I looked at myself in the mirror one final time. "Just be yourself," I whispered to my reflection. At 4:55, I left my apartment and walked toward 4th Street. The cafe was called the Blue Moon, and it had been there forever, or at least as long as I'd lived in town. It was the kind of place that existed outside of time, unchanged by trends or seasons, with its dark wood floors and its walls of windows that let in floods of natural light. The air always smelled like coffee and something baking, usually bread or scones, and there was always music playing. Soft enough to talk over, but present enough to fill the silences. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a small table by the window, and he stood when he saw me come in, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made my chest ache. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. And I felt the strangeness of it, how different he looked outside the bookstore, how the change of context made him both familiar and new. "Can I get you something?" he asked, gesturing toward the counter. "Chamomile tea, if they have it, with honey." He smiled. "I'll be right back." I watched him walk to the counter, watched the way he moved with that same careful awareness I'd noticed the first day. He ordered, paid, waited while the barista prepared our drinks, and then returned with a mug of tea for me and a black coffee for himself. "Thank you," I said as he set the mug down in front of me. Of course, we sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, the street was alive with couples walking hand in hand. Students with backpacks, an elderly man with a small dog on a leash. The world continued its motion around us while we sat in our small pocket of stillness. "I'm nervous," Daniel said suddenly, and the admission was so honest, so unexpected that I laughed. "Me too." "Really?" "Really." He relaxed visibly, his shoulders dropping, his hands unclenching from around his mug. "I kept thinking about what to say," he admitted. "I had this whole conversation planned in my head, and now I can't remember any of it." "That's okay," I said. "We don't need a script." "No," he agreed. "I guess we don't." And so we talked. It started simply, where were we from? What had brought us to this small town? What did we do when we weren't working? He was a carpenter, he told me, working for a small construction company that specialized in historic renovations. He had grown up in Vermont in an even smaller town than this one, and he'd moved here 3 years ago for a job that had since ended, but he'd stayed because he liked the pace of life, the way everyone knew everyone, the feeling of community. "What about you?" he asked. "Have you always lived here?" "No. I grew up about 2 hours north, in a town you've probably never heard of. I came here for college and just ... never left. It felt right, somehow. Like I'd found where I was supposed to be." Do you think there's such a thing? A place where we're supposed to be? I considered that, warming my hands on my mug. Outside, the light was beginning to change, the sun dropping lower, casting everything in gold. I think there are places that fit us better than others, I said slowly. Places that make us feel like we can breathe, like we can be who we actually are. He nodded, his eyes on me, really seeing me. Is this one of those places for you? I think so. Or it's becoming one. The conversation flowed from there, meandering and easy, the way the best conversations do. We talked about books, of course, our favorites, the ones that had changed us, the ones we kept meaning to read but never did. We talked about music and movies and the strange small rituals that make up a life. He told me about working with his hands, about the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again, about the smell of sawdust and the weight of a well-made hammer. I told him about the bookstore, about Mr. Holloway's wisdom and the regular customers who came in every week like clockwork, about the way books could save you when you didn't even know you needed saving. An hour passed, then two. The cafe grew busier around us, the after-work crowd filtering in, but we barely noticed. We were in our own world, a bubble of conversation and connection that felt both fragile and solid, like something new and precious that we were building together without quite realizing it. At some point, the light outside shifted from gold to pink to that deep blue that comes just before dark. The street lamps came on, and the cafe windows became mirrors, reflecting the warm interior back at us. I should probably let you go, Daniel said, though he didn't move to leave. I don't want to keep you. You're not keeping me, I said. I don't have anywhere else to be. He smiled at that, a soft smile full of something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, happiness, hope. Can I walk you home? He asked. I'd like that. We left the blue moon as evening settled over the town like a blanket. The air had cooled, and I wrapped my arms around myself, not quite cold, but aware of the temperature drop. Without a word, Daniel shrugged off his canvas jacket and held it out to me. Oh, I'm okay. Please, he said. I ran room anyway. I took it, slipped it on. It smelled like wood and something else, something clean and indefinable that I would later come to recognize as just him, the scent that was uniquely Daniel. We walked slowly, in no hurry to arrive anywhere. The town was quiet at this hour, that lull between dinner and the night's activities, when families were inside and the bars hadn't yet filled up. Our footsteps echoed softly on the sidewalk. Can I ask you something? Daniel said after a while. Anything. That book, The Ondatio. You said it was the kind of book you have to read twice. Why? I thought about that, about how to articulate something I felt more than understood. Because the first time you're experiencing it, you're caught up in the story, the romance, the tragedy. You're feeling everything, and it's overwhelming. But the second time, when you know what's coming, you can see all the layers underneath, the structure, the careful way he builds meaning. The second time, you can appreciate it instead of just surviving it. Surviving it, he repeated. Is that what good art does? Makes us survive it? Sometimes. The best art, I think, changes us. And change is never comfortable. He was quiet for a moment, processing that. Then, have you changed much over the years? I think so. I'm not sure I'd recognize who I was 5 years ago. Is that strange? No, he said. I think that's being alive. We reached my building too soon. I stopped at the bottom of the steps leading up to the front door, not quite ready for the evening to end. Thank you, I said. For the tea. For the conversation. Thank you for saying yes. We stood there, facing each other in the glow of the street lamp. I could see him clearly, the fine lines around his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way he was looking at me like I was something precious, something to be careful with. Can I see you again? He asked. Yes. Tomorrow? I laughed, surprised and delighted. You're eager. I am, he said simply. I've been coming to that bookstore for weeks trying to work up the courage to talk to you. Now that I have, I don't want to wait. My heart was doing that complicated thing again, that flutter and ache that felt too big for my chest. Tomorrow, I agreed. Same time, same place. Or different time, different place, and flexible. He smiled. How about I surprise you? I'll come by the bookstore before you close, and we'll figure it out from there. Okay. He took a step back, reluctant, and I could feel the pull between us, that invisible thread that had formed over tea and conversation. Good night, he said. Good night. I watched him walk away until he disappeared around the corner, and then I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Still wearing his jacket, feeling like the world had shifted on its axis, and I was seeing everything from a new angle. That was the beginning. What followed was a summer of discovery, of slow building intimacy, of learning another person from the inside out. Daniel became part of my daily life with a naturalness that felt inevitable, as if he'd always been there and I was just now noticing. He met me after work most days, and we'd walk through the town as evening fell, talking about everything and nothing. He showed me his current project, a Victorian house on the west side of town that he was helping to restore, stripping away decades of bad renovations to find the original beauty underneath. I brought him to my favorite spots, the park with the old oak tree where I'd spent countless afternoons reading, the tiny Mexican restaurant that made the best tamales in the state, the walking trail along the river that was perfect at sunset. We fell into rhythms. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday afternoons at his small apartment where he'd cook simple meals, and I'd watch him move around his kitchen with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Weeknight dinners that stretched into hours, conversations that wandered down paths neither of us had planned, silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. He had a small one-bedroom on the east side of town, above a bakery that perfumed his apartment with the smell of fresh bread every morning. The space was sparse but clean, with big windows that let in good light, and walls lined with bookshelves he'd built himself. He collected records, jazz mostly, some blues, a surprising amount of classical, and he'd play them while he worked, filling the apartment with sound. I learned that he was an early riser, that he drank his coffee black and strong, that he had a younger sister in Vermont he called every Sunday. I learned that he was quiet not because he had nothing to say, but because he chose his words carefully, that when he spoke, he meant it. I learned that his hands were always busy, always creating or fixing or building, and that sitting still made him restless. He learned that I was a night person, that I read before bed no matter how late it was, that I called my parents every Thursday. He learned that I was terrible at cooking but loved to bake, that I had a weakness for old movies and terrible reality TV, that I collected vintage postcards from places I'd never been. He learned that I talked too much when I was nervous and went silent when I was hurt, that I needed time alone to recharge, that I believed in signs and synchronicity and small magic. We learned each other the way you learn a language, gradually, through immersion and practice and occasional misunderstanding until we became fluent in the subtle dialects of each other's bodies and minds. The first time he kissed me, it was late June. We'd gone to the river for a picnic, just sandwiches and fruit and a bottle of cheap wine. It was a perfect evening, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. We'd found a spot on the bank where the willows draped their branches low, creating a kind of natural room, and we'd stayed there as the sun set, watching the light change on the water. We were lying on our backs, looking up through the willow branches at the emerging stars, and Dee said something about how strange it was that the light we were seeing from those stars was ancient, that we were looking at the past. Makes you think about time differently, doesn't it? Daniel had said, like, maybe everything is happening at once and we're just experiencing it linearly because that's all we can handle. I turned my head to look at him, and he was already looking at me, propped up on one elbow. "What?" I'd asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I want to kiss you," he'd said. "I've wanted to for weeks. Is that okay?" My heart had stopped and started again. Yes. He had leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, and when his lips touched mine, it was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. I'd kissed him back, and the world had narrowed to just that point of contact, that soft pressure, that taste of wine in summer. When we pulled apart, he'd rested his forehead against mine, and we'd stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, existing in the same space. "I'm falling for you," he'd whispered. "I need you to know that. I'm falling too," I'd whispered back. By July, we were inseparable. I'd never experienced anything like it, this merging of lives, this ease of compatibility. He had a key to my apartment. I had a drawer at his place. We fell asleep together most nights and woke up tangled in each other, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We talked about the future in vague, hopeful terms. Someday, maybe we'd get a place together, somewhere with more space, maybe a little house with a yard. He could have a workshop. I could have a library. We'd get a dog, the kind that likes long walks and curls up at your feet while you read. We'd travel, maybe see the world beyond this small town, though we'd always come back because this was home. It was all possibility, all potential. We were building a shared story, page by page, and I believed, truly believed, that we had all the time in the world. I remember one night in particular, in late July, when we were lying in his bed with the windows open and the sound of rain falling outside. A summer storm had rolled in, bringing with it that electric smell of ozone and wet earth. The apartment was dark except for the occasional flash of lightning, and the temperature had dropped enough that we'd pulled a blanket over ourselves. Daniel was tracing patterns on my arm, absent-minded, and I was hovering in that space between waking and sleeping, perfectly content. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he'd said suddenly. I'd opened my eyes, turned to look at him in the darkness. "Like what?" "Anything. Something true. Something you keep just for yourself." I thought about that, about the secret rooms we all carry inside ourselves. The things we don't share because they're too vulnerable, too revealing. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'm not real," I'd said finally. "Like I'm just going through the motions of being a person, and underneath, there's nothing. Just emptiness." He'd been quiet for a long moment, still tracing those patterns on my skin. Then, "You're the realest person I've ever met." "How do you know?" "Because you make me feel real too." I kissed him then, deep and slow, trying to convey everything I felt, everything I couldn't articulate. And when we'd made love that night, It was different from the times before, slower, more deliberate, more present. Like we were memorizing each other, like we knew somehow that time was precious and not guaranteed. Afterward, as the storm raged outside and he slept beside me, I'd lain awake, listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of his arm across my waist, and I thought, this is happiness, this right here, remember this. I wish I'd known why that thought had felt so urgent, why some part of me was already preparing for loss. August came, and with it, a subtle shift. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say, this is where it changed. But there was a change nonetheless, like a key shifting from major to minor, altering the emotional resonance of everything. Daniel started working longer hours. A big project, he said, a restoration that had gone over budget and behind schedule. He'd come home exhausted, covered in sawdust, with barely enough energy to eat before falling asleep. I understood. I worked retail. I knew about demanding schedules, but I missed him. I missed the long conversations, the unhurried evenings, the feeling that we had all the time we needed. It's just for a few weeks, he'd promised. Once this project wraps, things will go back to normal. But they didn't. The project finished, and there was another one, and another after that. He was building a reputation, he explained, establishing himself. If he turned down work now, he might not get called for the next job. This was how you built a career, a life. Surely I understood that. I did understand. Of course I did. But understanding didn't make the loneliness easier. I started spending more evenings alone, the way I had before Daniel. I'd come home from the bookstore and make myself dinner and read or watch TV, and the apartment felt emptier now than it had when being alone was simply my default state. Now I knew what I was missing. Now the absence had a shape, a Daniel-sized space that nothing else could fill. We still saw each other, of course, once or twice a week, snatched hours between obligations. But the ease had gone out of it, replaced by a kind of careful choreography where we tried to fit ourselves into each other as schedules without asking for too much, without being demanding, without acknowledging that something was slipping away. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself every relationship went through phases, that the honeymoon period couldn't last forever, that this was just real life asserting itself. I told myself a lot of things. What I didn't tell myself was the truth, that I was scared. Scared that I'd already lost him and just didn't know it yet. Scared that I'd loved him more than he'd loved me, that I'd invested more, that I was always going to be the one waiting while he decided whether I was worth the effort. Scared that I'd made him the center of my world and he'd made me a pleasant satellite in his. September arrived, and with it, the first real cold snap of autumn. The leaves were turning. The air had that crisp quality that makes you reach for sweaters. And the town was preparing for the Harvest Festival, the big event that marked the transition from summer to fall. There would be a parade, craft booths, live music in the town square, and everyone would turn out for it, the way they did every year. Daniel and I had talked about going together back in summer when it seemed impossibly far away. We'd made plans, vague but real, about spending the day wandering through the festival, eating kettle corn and cider donuts, maybe entering the pie baking contest together just for the fun of it. But as the date approached, he'd gotten quiet about it. "I'm not sure I can make it," he'd said one evening when I'd brought it up. We were at his apartment, sitting on his couch, a comfortable distance between us that felt new and wrong. Work stuff? On a Saturday? It's complicated. I let it drop, not wanting to push, not wanting to be the needy girlfriend who couldn't understand the demands of a career. But inside, something had hardened, a small kernel of resentment that I tried to ignore. The festival came, and I went alone. I told myself it was fine. I had friends, people I could walk around with. I didn't need Daniel there to have a good time. I was my own person, capable of enjoying things independently. But as I wandered through the crowds, past the booths selling handmade jewelry and local honey and blown glass, as I listened to the band on the main stage and watched couples dance in the street, I felt profoundly, achingly alone. I kept seeing us everywhere, in the couple sharing a funnel cake, in the man with his arm around his girlfriend's shoulders, in the way people moved through the world as units, as pairs, as teams. And I was singular, separate, drifting through the festival like a ghost, observing life but not quite living it. I left early, before the sun set, and walked home through the emptying streets. The town was still alive with festival noise behind me, but with each block it faded, until by the time I reached my apartment, there was only silence. I climbed the stairs, let myself in, and sat by the window, looking out at the street below where families were walking home. Children tired and sticky from cotton candy, parents carrying sleeping toddlers. Everyone connected, everyone part of something, and I cried. Not dramatic, heaving sobs, but quiet tears that slipped down my face and dripped onto my hands. Tears of loneliness and loss and the slow, terrible realization that I'd been lying to myself for weeks. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a phase. This was Daniel choosing over and over to prioritize everything else over me. And I was choosing over and over to accept it. I didn't hear from him the next day, or the day after that. On the third day, I called him. The phone rang 4 times before his machine picked up, his voice on the recording casual and warm. "Hey, you've reached Daniel. Leave a message." I hung up without speaking. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, I let myself think the thoughts I'd been avoiding. Maybe he didn't love me anymore. Maybe he'd never loved me the way I loved him. Maybe I misread everything from the beginning, projected my own feelings onto him, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. Or maybe he did love me, but not enough. Not enough to prioritize me. Not enough to make room in his life. Not enough to fight for this when things got difficult. I didn't know which possibility hurt more. He called the next evening, just as I was closing up the bookstore. I heard the phone ring from the back office where I was counting out the register, and Mr. Holloway answered it, then called out, "For you, dear." I knew somehow that it was Daniel. I could feel it, the way you feel a storm coming. I picked up the extension, my hand trembling slightly. "Hello?" "Hey." His voice was tired, rough around the edges. "I'm sorry I haven't called. It's been a lot." "It's okay," I said automatically, and immediately hated myself for it. It wasn't okay. "Can I see you tonight?" I looked at the clock. 7:30. Mr. Holloway was giving me a concerned look from the doorway, his kind eyes seeing more than I wanted him to see. "Okay," I said. "My place? I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up, and I stood there holding the receiver, feeling the weight of what was coming. Mr. Holloway walked over, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "you're going to be all right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I walked home slowly, delaying the inevitable. The evening was beautiful, cool, and clear, with the kind of sky that made you believe in something larger than yourself. The moon was rising, nearly full again, and the stars were beginning to appear. Those ancient lights that had witnessed every human drama since the beginning of time. I thought about that night by the river, when Daniel had kissed me for the first time, when we talked about time being nonlinear, everything happening at once. If that was true, then somewhere we were still there. Somewhere we were still happy. Somewhere none of this had happened yet, and we still had all the time in the world. But here, in this timeline, in this version of events, I climbed the stairs to my apartment and unlocked the door and waited. He arrived exactly 20 minutes later, just as he'd said. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, that familiar rhythm I'd memorized without meaning to. And then he was knocking 3 soft taps, and I was opening the door. He looked terrible. Not physically, he was still Daniel, still handsome in that understated way, but there was something in his eyes. A kind of exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. He looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there in the doorway, and I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity that this was the last time. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. Whatever he said next, whatever I said in response, would determine whether we continued or ended, whether the story had more chapters, or if we'd reached the final page. "Come in," I said, stepping back. He entered, and I closed the door behind him. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the air thicker. I'd left a lamp on in the living room, and it cast everything in warm amber light, making shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. "Do you want tea? Water?" I asked, falling back on hospitality because I didn't know what else to do. "No, thank you." I just ... Can we sit? We sat on my small couch, not touching, a careful distance between us. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the evening cars passing, distant voices, the rhythmic sound of someone bouncing a basketball in the street. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He stared at them for a long moment, and I waited, my heart beating too fast, my hands cold. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "a lot about us, about what I want." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't... God, this is harder than I thought it would be." He ran a hand through his hair. That gesture I'd found endearing once and now just made my chest ache. "I care about you. I need you to know that. What we had this summer was real. It mattered. Had. Was. Past tense. Both of us heard it. But," I said, because there was always a but I don't think I'm ready for this, for what you need, for what you deserve." He looked at me then, and his eyes were full of something that looked like regret, or maybe relief. "I'm not in a place where I can be the partner you need me to be. My work is demanding, and it's only going to get more demanding. I'm trying to build something, establish myself, and I need to focus on that right now." "I've never asked you not to focus on your work," I said, and I was proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I've been supportive. I've understood. I know you have. You've been amazing. That's what makes this so hard. You've done everything right, and I'm still..." He broke off, shook his head. "I'm still not happy, and that's not fair to you. You shouldn't have to wait around for me to figure my life out." There it was, the truth, spoken plainly. He wasn't happy. And he'd decided that instead of working on it, instead of fighting for us, it was easier to walk away. I felt something crack inside me, something fundamental. But I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't make this harder than it already was. "So this is it?" I asked. "You're ending this?" "I think it's for the best. For both of us." "Don't do that," I said, and now there was an edge to my voice. "Don't make this about what's best for me. This is your choice. Own it." He flinched, but nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry, this is my choice. I'm choosing to end this." We sat there in silence for a moment that stretched into eternity. I thought about all the things I could say, all the arguments I could make. I could tell him I loved him. I could ask him to reconsider, to give us more time, to try harder. I could cry and plead and make him feel guilty enough to stay. But what would be the point? He'd already decided. And I'd spent enough of my life waiting for people to choose me. I wasn't going to start begging now. Okay, I said finally. If that's what you want. He looked surprised, maybe even disappointed that I wasn't fighting harder, but he nodded. I think it is. Then I guess there's nothing else to say. He stood slowly, reluctantly, and I stood too. We walked to the door together, this final march, and when he reached for the handle, he paused. I really am sorry, he said. For what it's worth. I know, I said, and I did. I believed he was sorry. Sorry he had hurt me. Sorry things hadn't worked out the way we'd imagined. Sorry he couldn't be what I needed. But sorry didn't change anything. He left, and I closed the door behind him, and I stood there in my small apartment, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs, listening to the building settle, listening to the absence where he used to be. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt too numb for tears, too shocked, even though I'd known this was coming, even though some part of me had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I walked to my bedroom, lay down on my bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until the room grew dark and the sounds of the evening faded into the sounds of night. The days that followed had a strange, underwater quality to them. I went to work. I smiled at customers. I shelved books and made recommendations and processed sales. I functioned because that's what you do. Life doesn't stop for heartbreak. The world keeps turning, indifferent to your personal tragedies. Mr. Holloway watched me with worried eyes but said nothing. Just made sure I took my breaks, just brought me tea without being asked, just was there in that quiet, supportive way of his. My friends called, and I told them vague versions of the truth. Daniel and I had broken up. It was mutual. We wanted different things. I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was hollowed out, emptied, going through the motions of being a person while feeling like there was nothing inside. I'd wake up in the morning and forget, for just a moment, that he was gone, and then reality would crash back in, and I'd have to remember all over again. The worst times were the evenings. I'd come home to my apartment, and it felt haunted by the ghost of what we'd been. I'd see him everywhere, sitting at my small kitchen table, sprawled on my couch with a book, standing at my window looking out at the street. I'd hear phantom sounds, his voice calling my name, his footsteps on the stairs, his key in the lock. But when I turned to look, there was only emptiness. I tried to fill the space. I rearranged furniture. I bought new curtains. I went through my closet and removed everything that reminded me of him, his old t-shirt I'd slept in, a sweatshirt he'd left behind, a book he'd given me with an inscription I couldn't bear to read. It didn't help. The absence was still there, a negative space that nothing else could occupy. 2 weeks after he left, I walked past his apartment building. I hadn't meant to. I'd taken a different route home from the bookstore, trying to vary my routine, trying to trick my brain into thinking this was a new life, a fresh start. But I must have been on autopilot because suddenly I was standing on his street, looking up at his windows. The lights were on. He was home. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide what I felt. Anger, sadness, longing. All of it and none of it. Just a dull ache, like a bruise that wouldn't heal. I turned away before he could look out and see me standing there like some pathetic stalker. And I walked home through streets that felt foreign now, like I was a stranger in my own town. 3 weeks, a month, 6 weeks. Time passed in increments I measured and didn't measure, marked and unmarked. The leaves changed color, fell from the trees, carpeted the streets in red and gold and brown. The air grew colder. People started wearing heavy coats and scarves. Halloween came and went, children in costumes trick-or-treating up and down my street, their laughter filtering up through my windows. I was functioning better now. The raw edge of grief had dulled into something more manageable, more familiar. I was sleeping through the night again. I was eating regularly. I was even laughing sometimes, genuine laughter at something a customer said or a joke Mr. Holloway told. I was healing slowly, the way you heal from any wound a little bit each day. So gradually, you do not notice until suddenly you realize the pain isn't as sharp as it used to be. But I was also waiting. I hadn't admitted it to myself, but I was. Every time the phone rang, every time the bell above the bookstore door chimed, every time I heard footsteps in my building's hallway, some part of me tensed with anticipation. Maybe it would be him. Maybe he'd realized he'd made a mistake. Maybe he'd come back. He never did. And slowly, so slowly, I began to understand that he never would. This was it. This was the ending. There would be no dramatic reunion, no passionate reconciliation, no moment where he showed up at my door in the rain to tell me he couldn't live without me. That was the stuff of movies, of books, of stories. This was real life, and in real life, sometimes people just left and didn't come back. Sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes you gave someone your heart and they handed it back, carefully, apologetically, but definitively. The question was, what did you do with that heart after? How did you trust it to anyone else when it had been returned once, damaged, proven not quite enough? I didn't have an answer. But I was starting to understand that maybe the answer didn't matter as much as the question itself. Maybe what mattered was that I was asking, that I was thinking about a future, even a distant one, even an uncertain one. Maybe that was healing too. November came, and with it, the first snow. I woke one morning to find the world transformed, everything covered in a thin layer of white that made the familiar strange and beautiful. The town was quiet under its blanket of snow, sounds muffled, edges softened. I made coffee and stood at my window, watching the street below as people emerged from their homes, bundled and cautious, navigating the slippery sidewalks. Children were already out, making the most of this gift, building snowmen and throwing snowballs, their voices high and bright in the cold air. It had been exactly 3 months since Daniel had left. I realized this not because I'd been counting, I hadn't, not consciously, but because it was the 15th of November, and he'd left on the 15th of August. 3 months, a season, a quarter of a year, long enough for things to change, long enough for the sharpness of absence to dull into a chronic, manageable ache, long enough to start imagining a future that didn't include him. I've been thinking about that future more lately, about what I wanted, who I wanted to be, how I wanted to live. The relationship with Daniel had shown me something about myself that I'd never fully understood before. I had a tendency to disappear into other people, to make them the center of my universe while I orbited at the edges, pulling my light from their sun. I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to be my own center. I wanted to be whole unto myself, complete, without needing someone else to validate my existence. And if I met someone someday, if I fell in love again, because I had to believe I would. I wanted it to be different. I wanted to meet them as an equal, two whole people choosing to share space, not two halves trying desperately to make a whole. But first, I needed to figure out who I was when I was undefined by someone else as presence or absence. I decided, standing there at my window, watching the snow fall, that I would write to him, not to send. I knew better than that. Nothing good would come from reaching out, from reopening wounds that were finally beginning to close. But I needed to say the things I'd never said, to speak the truths I'd kept inside, to externalize the feelings that had been eating away at me from within. I needed to write it all down, every thought, every feeling, every moment of love and loss and everything in between. And then I needed to let it go. Not tonight. Tonight, I was tired and the snow was still falling, and I wanted to just exist for a while without thinking about Daniel or the past or what might have been. But soon I would write that letter. I would pour everything into it, all the love, all the hurt, all the lessons learned, and the person I was becoming because of and in spite of what we deepened to each other. And then I would put it away, unread by anyone but me, and I would finally, truly stop waiting. The decision once made settled something inside me. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about the letter often, composing sentences in my head while I worked, arranging thoughts into some kind of coherent structure. I wasn't ready to write it yet. The words were still too raw, too jumbled, but they were taking shape, clarifying, becoming something I could eventually articulate. In the meantime, I focused on small acts of reclamation. I started going to the Blue Moon again, the cafe where Daniel and I had our first date. I'd avoided it for months, unable to face the memories, but one Saturday afternoon, I walked in deliberately, intentionally, and ordered chamomile tea with honey. I sat at a different table, not the one by the window where we sat that first evening, and I brought a book, one of my favorites, and I read while I drank my tea. It hurt being there. But it was a different kind of hurt now. Not the sharp, immediate pain of an open wound, but the duller ache of a scar, a reminder that something had happened here, something important, something that had changed me. I could live with that kind of hurt. I also started saying yes to things again. When my friend Sarah invited me to a gallery opening, I went. When the bookstore's book club met to discuss the month's selection, I joined them instead of making excuses. When Mr. Holloway suggested I might want to lead a workshop on book recommendations for the library's reading program, I said I'd think about it, which was progress from my automatic no. I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick, moment by moment. Not the life I'd imagined with Daniel, but a different life, one that was entirely my own. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel like myself again. Not the self I'd been before Daniel. That person was gone, transformed by love and loss into someone new. But this new self felt solid, real, grounded in a way I'd never quite managed before. I was learning to be alone without being lonely, learning to enjoy my own company, to appreciate the quiet evenings, the freedom to do what I wanted when I wanted, the absence of compromise. There was a peace in solitude I discovered, a kind of clarity that came from not having to filter yourself through someone else's perception. I liked who I was becoming. That was the surprising thing. I'd expected to feel diminished by the breakup, reduced, less than I'd been when I was part of a we. But instead, I felt larger, more expansive, as if I'd been living in a small room and had suddenly discovered there were other rooms, whole wings of myself I'd never explored. Winter deepened. The days grew shorter, darker. The town took on that hush quality that comes with cold and snow, everyone moving a little slower, a little more carefully. And through it all, I carried the letter in my mind, that unwritten document that was slowly composing itself, waiting for the right moment to be born into the world. It was a Tuesday in early December when I finally sat down to write. Nothing special about the day, just a regular evening, the kind I'd had hundreds of times before. I came home from work, made myself dinner soup from a canned toast with butter, and afterward, instead of turning on the TV or picking up a book, I sat at my small kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen. Outside, it was snowing again, soft flakes drifting past my window like thoughts, like memories, like everything I needed to say. I sat there for a long time, pen poised over paper, not yet writing. Just being present with the moment, with the decision, with everything that had led me here. And then I began. Dear Daniel, I'm writing you a letter you'll never read. Maybe that makes this exercise pointless, or maybe it makes it the most honest thing I've done in months. When you know no one will read your words, you can say anything. You can tell the truth without fear of judgment or consequence. You can be completely, utterly yourself. So here's the truth. I loved you. Past tense, even though part of me still does, even though I suspect I always will in some small, private way. You were the first person who made me understand what all those songs and poems and stories were about. You made me feel seen, known, chosen. For a little while, you made me feel like I was enough exactly as I was. And then, slowly, you made me feel like I wasn't. I paused, reading what I'd written, feeling the weight of those words. It was true, all of it. The love and the hurt, existing simultaneously, intertwined so completely that you couldn't have one without the other. I kept writing. I don't blame you for leaving. Or maybe I do a little, but mostly I understand. We were young. We still are young. We were figuring out who we were, what we wanted, how to be ourselves, and part of something larger at the same time. And maybe we just weren't ready. Maybe the timing was wrong, or the circumstances, or maybe we simply weren't meant to be the people who saw each other through to the end. But here's what I need you to know, even though you'll never read this. You changed me. Not in the ways I expected, not by completing me or fixing me or making me whole, but by showing me what I was capable of feeling, how deeply I could love, how much I could give of myself. And also by leaving, by choosing your work over me, by prioritizing everything else, you showed me what I won't accept again. What I deserve more than. I deserve someone who chooses me. Not all the time. I'm not naive enough to think love means constant prioritization, constant attention. But sometimes, often, enough, I deserve someone who sees me as essential, not optional. Someone who makes room for me in their life, not because they have to, but because they want to. Because a life without me in it would feel incomplete. You didn't see me that way. Or maybe you did at first and then you stopped. I don't know which possibility is more painful. My hand was cramping, but I kept going. The words flowing now. Years of unspoken thoughts finally finding their way onto the page. I've spent the last 3 months waiting for you to come back. Not consciously. Not in a way I'd admit to anyone, maybe not even to myself, but waiting nonetheless. Listening for your footsteps, expecting your voice. Turning toward every door that opened, every phone that rang, every moment of possibility. Tonight, I'm done waiting, not because I don't care anymore. Not because the love has vanished or the memories have faded, but because I finally understand something I should have known all along. You're not coming back. And more importantly, I don't need you to. I thought losing you would destroy me. I thought I'd crumble into something unrecognizable, that the grief would consume me entirely. But here I am, still standing, still breathing, still capable of joy and hope and the small sacred act of living. I'm stronger than I knew. That's what you taught me in the end, not through your presence, but through your absence. I set the pen down, flexed my fingers, looked at what I'd written. The words sat there on the page, solid and real, more honest than anything I'd said out loud in months. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, accumulating on windowsills and car roofs, transforming the ordinary world into something clean and new. I picked up the pen again. Do you remember the last time we saw each other? Really saw each other, I mean, not that final conversation when you came to tell me it was over. I'm talking about before that, when we still thought we had time. It was July, I think. One of those perfect summer evenings when the light stays golden for hours and the air smells like cut grass and possibility. We'd gone to the river, brought a blanket and some wine. We lay there watching the water, not talking much, just being together in that easy way we had. You fell asleep with your head on my shoulder, and I stayed completely still, not wanting to wake you, memorizing the weight of you, the rhythm of your breathing, the way your hand rested on my arm. I remember thinking, this is happiness. This right here, remember this. I didn't know I was already grieving. That some part of me could feel you slipping away even then, even in that moment of apparent peace. The body knows things the mind refuses to acknowledge. The heart sees endings before they arrive. I wish I'd known that would be our last good day. I would have paid more attention. I would have held you tighter. I would have said all the things I kept inside, all the small declarations of love that seemed too vulnerable to speak aloud. But maybe it's better that I didn't know. Maybe we need those final moments of innocence, those last hours before everything changes, when we still believe in forever. I paused, took a sip of water, looked around my small kitchen. The candle I'd lit earlier was burning low now, the flame steady in the still air. Everything was quiet except for the soft sound of snow against the window, that gentle whisper of winter settling in. The first month after you left was the hardest. You know that scene in movies where the heartbroken person lies in bed for days, unable to move, unable to function? I always thought that was dramatic exaggeration, but it's not. Grief is physical. It lives in your body, makes your limbs heavy, your chest tight, your head fog-bound. Everything requires enormous effort, getting up, getting dressed, going through the motions of a normal day. I'd wake up and forget, just for a second, that you were gone. And then I'd remember, and the loss would hit me all over again, fresh and sharp, like it was happening for the first time. I stopped eating properly, not on purpose, I just forgot. Food lost all flavor, became nothing but fuel, something I consumed mechanically when my body demanded it. I lost weight, enough that Mr. Holloway started leaving sandwiches for me at work, enough that my clothes hung differently, enough that I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Sleep was impossible. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through the same thoughts over and over. What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? If I'd been more patient, more understanding, more of whatever you needed, would you have stayed? It took me weeks to understand that those were the wrong questions, that your leaving wasn't about what I did or didn't do. It was about you, about what you wanted, about choices you made that had nothing to do with my worthiness or lack thereof. But in those first raw weeks, I couldn't see that. I could only feel the absence, the hole where you'd been, the empty space that nothing else could fill. I wrote for another hour, filling page after page with memories and observations, with a careful cataloging of loss. My hand ached, but I kept going, driven by something I couldn't name, something that felt like necessity. By the second month, I was functioning again, going to work, talking to people, pretending to be fine. And some days, I almost was fine. I'd go hours without thinking about you, and then something small would remind me, a song on the radio, the smell of sawdust, a certain quality of afternoon light, and I'd be back in it, drowning in memory. I started avoiding places we'd been together. The cafe where we had our first date, the river path where we'd walked so many evenings, the Mexican restaurant with the good tamales. Even certain streets in town became off limits, too saturated with the ghost of us to navigate safely. My world shrank. I created a careful geography of avoidance, a map of where I could and couldn't go, what I could and couldn't bear to see. But you can't live like that forever. Eventually, you run out of alternate routes. Eventually, you have to face the places that hurt. The candle guttered and went out, leaving only the soft glow from the lamp in my living room. I stood, stretched, walked to the window. The snow had stopped, and the street below was pristine, unmarked by footprints or tire tracks. A blank canvas, a fresh start. I thought about leaving the letter there, unfinished, but something pulled me back to the table. I wasn't done yet. There was more to say, more to excavate from the deep places where I'd buried it. I lit another candle, settled back into my chair, picked up the pen. The third month was when I started to change. Not healing, not yet, that would take longer. But changing, slowly letting go of the idea that you were coming back, slowly accepting that this was my life now, singular and self-contained, and I needed to figure out how to live it. I started saying yes to things again, small things at first, coffee with a friend, a movie I'd wanted to see, a walk through the park even though we'd walked there together 100 times. Each yes was an act of bravery. Each time I chose to participate in life instead of just observing it, I was choosing myself. Choosing to believe that I deserved good things, beautiful things, joyful things, even without you there to witness them. I won't pretend it was easy. Every experience was colored by your absence. Every good moment had an asterisk next to it. This would be better if Daniel were here. This would mean more if I could share it with him. But gradually, so gradually I barely noticed, the asterisks began to fade. Experiences became their own reward, not just opportunities to create stories I'd tell you later. I started living for myself instead of living in anticipation of the moment when you de-return and I de-catch you up on everything you de-missed. Because you weren't returning. You'd made your choice, and it wasn't me. And I needed to make my own choice, and it was me. It had to be me. I wrote about the small victories of those months. The first night I slept through until morning. The first meal I ate that actually tasted like something. The first laugh that came naturally without forcing it. The first morning I woke up and didn't immediately think of him. There's this theory about grief that it comes in stages. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Like there's a linear path from loss to healing, a set of stairs you climb until you reach some final platform of peace. But that's not how it worked for me. My grief was circular, recursive, doubling back on itself. I'd have a good week and think I was past the worst of it, and then something would trigger me and I'd be right back at the beginning, raw and newly broken. I'd be angry one day, depressed the next, cycling through bargaining scenarios in my head if I'd just done this differently, if I'd been that instead, and then I'd arrive at acceptance, only to wake up the next morning back in denial, convincing myself this was all temporary, that any day now you'd realize your mistake. It was exhausting. This constant emotional weather, these unpredictable storms. I never knew which version of grief I'd be feeling when I opened my eyes each morning. But here's what I learned. You don't heal from grief. You learn to carry it. It becomes part of you, woven into the fabric of who you are. And slowly, the weight of it becomes bearable. You get stronger, or the grief gets lighter, or both. And one day, you realize you're not being crushed by it anymore. You're just living with it the way you live with any scar, any permanent change to your landscape. Outside, someone was walking down the street, their footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. I watched their progress, a solitary figure moving through the quiet night, and I felt a strange kinship with them. We were all alone, really, even when we were surrounded by people. All of us carrying our private griefs, our secret losses, our invisible wounds, but we kept walking anyway. That was the thing. We kept moving forward, even when we didn't know where we were going, even when every step hurt. December came, and with it, a kind of reckoning. The holidays approaching, all those celebrations of togetherness and family and love. I'd imagined spending them with you back when I still thought we had a future. We'd talked about it vaguely, maybe driving to Vermont to meet your family, or bringing you home to meet mine, or just staying here and creating our own traditions. Instead, I was alone, and I had to decide what that meant. Was I going to let it defeat me, to spend the holidays mourning what I'd lost? Or was I going to choose something different, something harder but more honest, to be present with what I had instead of what I lost? I chose presence. Not perfectly, not consistently, but I tried. I went to the bookstore's holiday party and actually enjoyed myself. I helped Mr. Holloway decorate the shop with garlands and white lights. And when he put on Christmas music, I sang along instead of crying. I accepted my parents' invitation to come home for a few days, even though I knew they'd ask about you, even though I'd have to admit that we'd broken up, that I was single again, that their daughter, who'd seemed so happy just a few months ago, was now quietly heartbroken. They were kind about it. My mother held me while I cried, not saying anything, just being there. My father made me my favorite breakfast every morning, pancakes with real maple syrup, and didn't mention your name once. And being there in my childhood home, surrounded by the familiar and the safe, I felt something shift. I was still their daughter, still loved, still valued, still part of something larger than my failed relationship. Your leaving hadn't erased me. It had only changed me. I was beginning to understand that change and loss aren't the same thing. I filled another page and another, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken and everything I'd been holding back was finally flowing free. I want to tell you about a moment. It was late December, a few days after Christmas. I'd returned to my apartment and I was unpacking my bag, putting away the gifts my parents had given me: a new scarf, some books, a framed photograph of our family from when I was young. I found your tie-shirt at the bottom of my closet, the one I'd worn to sleep in for weeks after you left, until your scent had faded from it and it was just a shirt again, nothing special, nothing sacred. I held it in my hands, this gray cotton shirt with a logo from some brewery you'd visited, and I realized I felt nothing. Not sadness, not longing, not even nostalgia, just neutrality. It was a shirt, nothing more. I almost threw it away, but then I decided to keep it, not as a memorial to what we'd been, but as a reminder of what I'd survived. Physical proof that I'd loved someone and lost them and was still here, still whole, still capable of going on. That's when I knew I was going to be okay. When I could look at the artifacts of our relationship and feel nothing but a kind of gentle distance. The way you might feel about a photograph from your childhood, recognizing the person you were, the life you lived, but not longing to go back to it. The clock on my wall showed it was past midnight. I'd been writing for hours and I was tired, but there was a good tiredness to it. The kind that comes from having done something necessary and true. I stretched, made myself more tea, returned to the letter. The new year came quietly. I stayed home alone, watching the countdown on television with the sound muted. When midnight arrived, when the year officially turned from the one that held us to the one that wouldn't, I felt something release in my chest. A breath I'd been holding, a tension I'd been carrying. This was a new year, and I was a new person. Not the girl who'd fallen in love with you in a bookstore, not the woman who'd waited for you to choose her, but someone else entirely. Someone still forming, still discovering herself, still learning what she wanted and needed and deserved. January was cold that year. The kind of cold that makes everything brittle, where your breath freezes in the air and the snow squeaks under your boots. I started walking in the mornings before work, bundled in layers, moving through the empty streets while the town still slept. There was something meditative about those walks. The rhythm of my footsteps, the bite of cold air in my lungs, the way the world looked in that blue pre-dawn light. I'd think about everything and nothing. I'd let my mind wander, following whatever path it chose, not forcing anything, not trying to arrive at any particular conclusion. One morning, I found myself on your street. I hadn't meant to go there. My feet had carried me without consulting my brain. I stood at the corner, looking up at your building, at the windows of your apartment. The lights were off. You were probably still asleep, or maybe you'd moved, or maybe you were awake in the darkness, thinking your own thoughts, living your own life that had nothing to do with me anymore. I stood there for a long time, and I waited for the pain to hit, for the longing, the regret, the desperate wish that things had gone differently. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. This had happened. We had happened. And now it was over, and that was okay. Everything ends eventually. Every story has a final page. I turned away from your building and continued my walk, and I didn't look back. I wrote about the slow return to normalcy, to a life that felt like mine again instead of just the space you'd left behind. About the bookstore and the customers who became friends. About the rhythms of work and home and the small pleasures I'd forgotten amidst of loving. You, Mr. Holloway, gave me more responsibilities at the store. I started curating a staff pick section, choosing books I loved and writing little recommendation cards for them. I organized a reading series on Thursday evenings, inviting local authors to come read from their work. It was strange returning to Thursdays. That had been our day, yours and mine. The day you'd come into the bookstore every week, the day that marked the beginning of us. For a while, I couldn't face Thursday without thinking of you, without feeling that pang of loss. But slowly, Thursdays became something else. They became mine again. Not the empty space where you used to be, but something full in their own right. The reading series was a success. People came, bought books, stayed afterward to discuss what they'd heard. We created community, Mr. Holloway and I, a space where people could gather around their love of words. I was proud of that, proud of what I'd built, what I created from the ashes of what we'd been. February came, Valentine's Day, with all its painful reminders of romance and coupling. I'd been dreading it, this celebration of love when I was newly single, still learning how to be alone. But the day itself was anticlimactic. I went to work. I sold books to people buying gifts for their partners. I smiled and wrapped purchases in pretty paper and wished everyone a happy day. And I didn't cry once. In the evening, my friend Sarah invited me over. She was single too, had been for years by choice. And she'd decided to host an anti-Valentine's party pizza and wine and movies that had nothing to do with romance. We watched action films and laughed at the absurd plot holes and ate too much pizza. And somewhere in the middle of the second movie, I realized I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not the desperate, forced happiness I'd been performing for months, but real contentment, real peace. You weren't there, and I didn't need you to be. I was enough, all by myself. My life was enough. This moment was enough. That was the night I stopped waiting. Really stopped, not just in theory, but in practice. I stopped listening for your footsteps, stopped hoping you'd call. Stopped imagining scenarios where you realized you'd made a mistake and came back to me. I let you go. Not with anger or bitterness, but with something that felt almost like gratitude. You'd given me something precious, not just love, but the experience of loving, the knowledge of what I was capable of feeling. And you'd given me something equally valuable in leaving the opportunity to find myself again. to remember who I was when I wasn't defined by someone else's presence. The pages were piling up now, covered in my handwriting, the physical manifestation of everything I'd been carrying inside. My hand was cramping badly, but I was almost done. I could feel it, the way you feel the end of a storm, the way the air changes just before the rain stops. March brought the thaw. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass underneath, and the world began to wake up again. Crocuses pushed through the last patches of snow, trees started budding. The light changed quality, became softer, warmer, more forgiving. I opened my windows for the first time in months, let the fresh air in, let the winter out. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, scrubbing away the accumulated dust and stagnation of those dark months. I washed all my linens, organized my closet, threw away things I no longer needed. It felt like a ritual, this cleaning, a way of marking the change, of physically manifesting the internal transformation that had been happening so slowly I barely noticed it. I was different now, harder in some ways, softer in others, more careful with my heart, but also more open to possibility, more aware of my own needs, my own boundaries, my own worth. I'd learned that I could survive heartbreak, that I was stronger than I'd known, that loss didn't define me, didn't diminish me, didn't make me less of who I was. If anything, it had made me more. I paused, read back over what I'd written. Hours of words, pages of memory, a whole relationship distilled down to its essence, the love, the loss, the lessons learned. There was more I could say, there was always more. But maybe the point wasn't to say everything. Maybe the point was just to say enough, to acknowledge what had been, what it had meant, what I'd learned from it. So here's what I want to say in closing, Daniel. Not to you, really, because you'll never read this, but to myself, to the universe, to whatever comes next. Thank you for loving me, even imperfectly, even temporarily. Thank you for showing me what I was capable of feeling, what I was capable of surviving. Thank you for leaving, because your absence taught me things your presence never could. I don't hate you. I don't even miss you anymore, not the way I did. What I feel now is more complicated than that, a kind of tender distance, an acknowledgement of what we were without wishing we still were it. You were a part of my story, an important chapter, maybe one of the most important, but you're not the whole book. And I'm finally ready to turn the page, to see what comes next, to write the rest of my story in my own words, on my own terms. I'm finally ready to stop waiting. And so I release you. I release us. I release the dream of what we might have been and embrace the reality of what we were, beautiful for a moment. Painful when it ended, but ultimately just one relationship among many I'll have in this lifetime. You taught me what I don't want, which is almost as valuable as knowing what I do. And for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful, and I'm done, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. Goodbye, Daniel. For real this time. For good. I set down the pen, flexed my aching hand, looked at the stack of pages covered in my handwriting. All those words, all those feelings, finally externalized, no longer living inside me like something toxic I couldn't digest. It was nearly 3 a.m. now. The world outside was completely still, holding its breath between night and dawn. I felt exhausted and exhilarated at the same time, emptied out but also strangely full, like I'd created space for something new by releasing the old. I gathered up the pages, straightened them into a neat stack. For a moment, I considered burning them, dramatic, final, a way of literally letting go. But that felt too much like erasure, and I didn't want to erase what had happened. I just wanted to acknowledge it and move on. Instead, I found an envelope, slid the pages inside, wrote on the front in careful letters, a letter to my ex, the night I finally stopped waiting. I tucked it into the back of my desk drawer behind some old tax documents and receipts I kept meaning to organize. Not hidden exactly, just stored away. A record of this moment, this transformation, this before and after in my life. Someday, years from now, I might find it again and read it and barely remember the feeling that had generated all those words. Or maybe I'd remember perfectly, but the pain would be so distant it would feel like it belonged to someone else, another version of me who had loved and lost and survived. Either way would be fine. I stood and walked to the window one last time before bed. The street below was empty, peaceful, the snow reflecting the amber glow of the street lamps. Somewhere in this town, Daniel was sleeping. Somewhere he was living his life, making his choices, being happy or sad or something in between. And I was here in my small apartment, alone but not lonely, learning how to be whole without him. The moon was high and bright, nearly full again, just as it had been that night by the river when he'd kissed me for the first time. Full circles, returning cycles, the way time moved in spirals instead of straight lines. I thought about the woman I'd been then, young, hopeful, so eager to be loved, so ready to give her heart away without reservation. I felt tender toward her, protective. She hadn't known what was coming, hadn't known how much it would hurt or how long it would take to heal, but she'd survived it. We'd survived it. And we'd become someone stronger, someone wiser, someone more fully herself. I pressed my hand against the cold glass of the window, left a print that immediately began to fade. Everything was temporary love, loss, pain, healing. The only constant was change. The only guarantee was that nothing stayed the same. But that was okay. That was life. And I was ready to keep living it, to see where the story went next, to write the chapters that were waiting to be written. I left the window, turned off the lamp, blew out the candle. In the darkness, I found my way to my bedroom, climbed into bed, pulled the blankets up to my chin. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, excitement. Not for anything specific, just for the future, for the unknown, for all the things that were possible now that I'd stopped living in the past. Tomorrow was a new day, and I would wake up to it alone, yes, but also free. Free to become whoever I wanted to be. Free to love again or not. Free to make mistakes and learn from them, to take risks and face consequences, to live fully and messily and beautifully. The letter was written, the waiting was over, and I was finally, truly ready to begin again. Spring came in slowly that year, reluctant, taking its time. I remember April as a month of rain, those soft gray days where the sky and the earth seemed to blur together, where everything was muted and gentle and growing secretly beneath the surface. I'd go to work in the rain, walk home in the rain, listen to it against my windows at night. It should have been depressing, all that gray, all that water. But instead, I found it soothing. The world was washing itself clean, and I was too. Mr. Holloway noticed the change in me. "You seem lighter," he said one afternoon when the store was quiet and we were both shelving returns. "Like you've put down something heavy you've been carrying." "I have," I told him. And I had. The letter had done what I needed it to do, created a boundary between what had been and what would be. I'd honored the past and released it, all at once. I started thinking about the future more concretely. What did I want? Where did I want to go? Who did I want to become? I decided to take a class at the community college just for fun. Creative writing. I'd always loved reading, but I'd never tried writing seriously. It felt like the right time to start, to use all these feelings and experiences as raw material to transform loss into art. The class met on Wednesday evenings in a small room with tall windows and old wooden desks. There were 12 of us, a mix of ages and backgrounds, all there because we had stories to tell and didn't quite know how. Our teacher was a woman in her 60s named Eleanor, who'd published 2 novels decades ago and now taught because she loved it. She had gray hair she wore in a long braid down her back and glasses on a chain around her neck. And she spoke about writing the way some people spoke about prayer, with reverence and joy and deep seriousness. Writing is how we make sense of our lives, she told us that first night. How we take the chaos of experience and shape it into something with meaning, with structure, with beauty. You don't write to remember. You write to understand. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. About the difference between memory and understanding. About how you could live through something and not really know what it meant until later. Until you'd had time and distance and the ability to see the patterns. I wrote about Daniel, of course. Not directly, not in a way anyone would recognize. But I wrote about love and loss, about waiting and letting go, about the versions of ourselves we shed as we grow. The other students were kind when I shared my work. They offered suggestions gently, pointed out places where the emotion was too on the nose or the metaphor didn't quite work. And I listened and I learned and I revised. This was what healing looked like, I realized. Not dramatic transformation, but these small accumulations of new experience, new skill, new understanding. You didn't become a different person overnight. You became different one day at a time, one choice at a time, one small act of courage at a time. By May, I could walk past Daniel's apartment building without feeling anything at all. Could hear his name mentioned in conversation and not flinch. Could see couples together and feel happy for them instead of sad for myself. These were my victories, small but significant. Evidence that time really did heal, that you really could move through grief and come out the other side. I ran into him once in early June. I was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, browsing the vegetable stalls when I saw him across the way. He was with someone, a woman, young, pretty, laughing at something he'd said. His arm was around her shoulders, casual and comfortable. For just a moment, my heart stuttered. Old muscle memory, old pain trying to reassert itself, but then it passed. Like a wave that rises and falls and leaves you standing exactly where you were, unchanged. I watched them for a moment, Daniel and his new girlfriend, living their life, being happy, and I felt nothing. No jealousy, no longing, no bitterness. Just a kind of distant wish for his happiness, the way you might wish well to an acquaintance, someone whose name you remember, but whose life no longer intersects with yours. He didn't see me. I made sure of that, turning away before he could look up, disappearing into the crowd. I didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to create an awkward moment for either of us. We were past that now, past the need for closure or conversation or any kind of interaction at all. We were strangers who used to know each other, and that was fine. I walked home through the sunny streets, carrying my bag of vegetables and fresh bread, and I felt good, solid, whole, like I'd passed some final test I hadn't known I was taking. That evening, I took out the letter from my desk drawer. I read through it for the first time since I'd written it, seeing it with fresh eyes, with the perspective of 6 months' distance. Some of it made me cringe, the places where I'd been too harsh or too kind, where I hadn't quite captured the complexity of what I'd felt. But most of it felt true, honest, a real record of what I'd gone through and how I'd survived it. I put it back in its envelope, returned it to the drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it forever, but because I wasn't quite ready to let it go. Maybe someday I would be. Maybe someday I'd take those pages and finally burn them, watching the words curl and blacken and turn to ash, but not yet. For now, they could stay where they were, a reminder of who I'd been and how far I'd come. Summer arrived properly, and with it, a sense of fullness, of completion. I turned 24 at the end of June. My parents came to visit, took me out to dinner at the nice Italian place on the edge of town. We sat on the patio under string lights, and my mother presented me with a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple and elegant, with a small charm key. "For opening new doors," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. The way you've handled this year. The way you've kept going." I felt tears prick my eyes, but good tears, grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." That night, lying in bed, I thought about doors and keys, about endings and beginnings, about how sometimes you had to close one thing completely before you could open another. I'd closed the door on Daniel, on us, on who I'd been when I was with him. And now there were other doors waiting, other possibilities, other versions of my life I hadn't yet imagined. I thought about that quote. I couldn't remember who said it, about how we read all stories in the end. If that was true, then I was writing mine carefully now, choosing each word, each chapter, each turn of plot with intention. This had been my sad chapter, my last chapter, my learning dash to dash be dash alone, dash and dash, okay, dash with it chapter. But it was ending now. I could feel it. The way you feel seasons change, that subtle shift in the air, in the light, and the quality of time itself. A new chapter was beginning. And I didn't know what it would hold: love, or adventure, or heartbreak, or joy, or probably some combination of all of those things. But I knew one thing for certain: I was ready for it. Ready to stop looking backward and start looking forward. Ready to stop mourning what I'd lost and start celebrating what I'd found myself. My strength, my resilience, my capacity to survive and even thrive in the aftermath of loss. I was ready to stop being the woman who been left and become the woman who chosen to stay with herself. Stay present, stay open to whatever came next. The waiting was over. Not just for Daniel, but for everything. For permission, for rescue, for someone else to make me whole. I was already whole. I'd always been whole. I just needed to remember that. And now I had. July brought heat and long evenings, the kind where the light lingered until past 9 and the air stayed warm even after the sun went down. I spent my evenings reading on my small balcony, or walking through the town, or meeting friends for ice cream. Simple pleasures, the kind I'd overlooked when my life revolved around Daniel, when every free moment was something to be filled with him or shaped around his schedule. Now I had all the time in the world, and it belonged entirely to me. I went to the river one evening near the end of the month, back to the spot where Daniel and I had spread our picnic blanket, where he'd first kissed me, where we'd watched the stars emerge and believed we had forever. I hadn't been back since the breakup. It had felt too loaded, too painful, a place too saturated with memory to approach safely. But tonight, I needed to go. Needed to reclaim it, to strip it of its power over me. The walk was the same as I remembered, through town, past the old church, down the path lined with willow trees that opened onto the riverbank. The water was low this time of year, moving slowly, catching the late afternoon light and turning it gold. I found the spot easily. The same willow tree, the same clear patch of grass, the same view of the water. I spread out the blanket I brought and lay down on my back, looking up through the branches at the sky. Evening was coming on, that magical hour when the world transitions from day to night, when everything is possible. I expected to feel sad lying there, expected the memories to overwhelm me, to pull me back into grief, but instead, I felt peaceful. This was just a place, beautiful, yes, but not sacred, not special. Just a riverbank where two people had once been happy, and then unhappy, and then nothing at all. The past had no power over me anymore. I'd taken it back. All of it, the memories, the places, the moments that had felt stolen when he left. They were mine again, not ours, just mine. I lay there as the sky deepened from blue to purple to that particular shade of indigo that only exists at dusk. The first stars appeared, tentative, testing the darkness before committing fully. And I thought about the woman who'd been here a year ago, who'd kissed a man she thought she'd love forever, who'd believed in certainty and permanence and happily ever after. I mourned her a little, that younger, more innocent version of myself. She'd been so hopeful, so trusting, so willing to give everything without holding anything back. But I didn't want to be her anymore. I wanted to be who I was now, someone who'd been broken and had put herself back together. Someone who knew that love didn't always last, that people left, that nothing was guaranteed. Someone who loved anyway or would love again, because knowing the risks didn't mean refusing to take them. It just meant entering with your eyes open, with boundaries, with the knowledge that you could survive loss, that you were complete with or without another person, that your worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose to stay. A breeze moved through the willow branches, carrying the scent of water and growing things. Somewhere across the river, a bird called out, answered by another. The world was alive all around me, indifferent to my small human drama, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of who loved whom or who left or who stayed. There was comfort in that, in being part of something larger, something that would continue long after I was gone, after everyone I'd ever known was gone, after even the memory of this moment had faded completely. We were all just temporary. Everything was temporary. The only thing we could do was be present while we were here, to feel what we felt, to love when we could, to let go when we had to. I stood up as full dark settled in, folded my blanket, took one last look at the river. Then I turned and walked back toward town, toward my small apartment, toward my quiet life that was slowly becoming loud again in all the right ways. Behind me, the river kept flowing. The stars kept emerging, the world kept turning, and I kept walking. August came, and with it, the anniversary. 1 year since Daniel had sat on my couch and told me he was leaving. 1 year since everything had ended or begun, depending on how you looked at it. I marked the day privately, quietly. Woke up that morning and acknowledged what it was, what it meant. Then I got dressed and went to work and lived my life like any other day, because that's what it was now. Just another day, not weighted with significance or pain, not a wound that still bled. Mr. Holloway gave me a knowing look when I came in, squeezed my shoulder gently in passing. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We understood each other, he and I. He'd lived long enough to know that some days just needed to be gotten through with quiet grace, and that the best support was often just presence, just bearing witness. That evening, after closing up the store, I walked home the long way, past all the places I'd avoided for so many months. The cafe where we'd had our first date, the street where his apartment was, the park where we'd spent countless afternoons. I walked slowly, deliberately, reclaiming each location, stripping it of its power. These were just places. Just buildings and streets and patches of grass. They didn't belong to him or to us or to the past. They belonged to the town, to everyone, to the present moment. And I was part of that present moment, alive and whole and moving forward. When I got home, I made myself dinner pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy but made with care. I ate slowly, tasting everything, present with the experience of nourishing myself. After dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and wrote in the journal I'd been keeping since spring, since Eleanor's writing class had taught me the value of regular reflection. 1 year, I wrote, 1 full rotation around the sun since the end of us, and I'm still here, still standing, still capable of joy and hope and love, even if that love is currently directed at myself, at my life, at the small sacred acts of daily living. I don't think about him much anymore. When I do, it's without charge, without electricity. He's become a character in a story I used to tell, a plot point in my history, important but not defining. What defines me now is what I chose to do with the loss, how I chose to survive it, to learn from it, to become stronger and softer simultaneously. How I chose to stay open even when closing down would have been easier, safer, less risky. I'm proud of myself. I don't say that enough, don't acknowledge it enough. But I am proud of my resilience, my courage, my willingness to keep going even when everything hurt. I survived, and not just survived, I grew, I changed. I became more fully myself. That's the gift loss gave me, strange as it sounds. It forced me to find myself again, to remember who I was when I wasn't half of a we, to build a life that was mine and mine alone. And now, standing in that life, looking around at what I've created, I can see it's good. Not perfect, not what I'd imagined, but good in its own right, full in its own way. I don't need Daniel anymore. Don't need anyone to complete me or validate me or make me feel worthy of love. I'm already worthy, I always was. And someday when I'm ready, I'll love again, but differently this time. From wholeness instead of from need. From choice instead of from fear of being alone. For now though, I'm content with this, with myself. With the quiet, steady rhythm of my days, with the knowledge that I can be my own home, my own refuge, my own source of comfort. 1 year, 365 days. Each one a small victory, a small step forward, a small act of choosing life over grief. I made it. I'm making it. I'll keep making it. And that's enough. I closed the journal, finished my tea, washed the dishes slowly and mindfully. Then I prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine that had become a kind of meditation, washing my face, brushing my teeth, pulling on soft pajamas, turning down the covers. Before I turned off the light, I opened my desk drawer and looked at the envelope containing the letter. It sat there quietly, unremarkable, just pages and ink and everything I'd needed to say to close that chapter. I didn't take it out, didn't need to. I knew what it said, knew what it meant, knew it had served its purpose. Tomorrow, I decided I would burn it. Not out of anger or need for dramatic closure, but simply because it was time. Time to release even the physical artifact of that grief, to let it transform from something solid into smoke and ash and memory. But tonight, I would sleep. Peacefully, deeply, without dreams of him or us or what might have been. Just sleep, clean and restorative, the kind that lets you wake up ready for whatever comes next. I turned off the light and settled into bed, pulling the blankets up, finding the comfortable hollow in my pillow that my head had shaped over years of nights. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, I was quieter still. And in that stillness, in that peace, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not for the relationship exactly, though I was grateful for what it had taught me. But for this moment, this now, this life I was building one small choice at a time. I was grateful to be here, to have survived, to be whole again, or maybe whole for the first time. I was grateful for the waiting being over, and I was grateful most of all for myself, for my strength, for my resilience, for my capacity to love and lose and love again. Sleep came gently, easily, pulling me down into its depths like water, like comfort, like home. And I went willingly, peacefully, knowing that when I woke, tomorrow would be waiting, not threatening, not frightening, but full of quiet possibility, full of gentle promise, full of everything I needed. Morning came with soft light through my curtains, the kind that doesn't demand anything, that simply offers itself like a gift. I woke slowly, luxuriously, without an alarm. It was Saturday, my day off, and I had no obligations, no schedule, just open hours stretching ahead like an empty page. I made coffee and stood at my window, looking out at the street below. People were out already, a woman walking her dog, a couple jogging together, an elderly man tending to the flower boxes on his balcony. Everyone living their lives, carrying their own stories, their own losses and triumphs, their own quiet struggles and victories. We were all connected, I thought, even in our separateness. All of us doing our best, all of us figuring it out as we went, all of us worthy of gentleness and grace. I finished my coffee, showered, dressed in comfortable clothes. Then I took the letter from my desk drawer, held it in my hands one final time. The envelope was worn now, soft by months of being handled, opened and closed, revisited and set aside. All those words inside, all those feelings, crystallized into physical form. I needed to write it, needed to externalize everything I'd been carrying, to give it shape and substance outside of myself. It had been a necessary purging, a ritual of release, but I didn't need it anymore. I carried it to the kitchen, placed it in my small metal sink. From a drawer, I retrieved a box of matches, struck one, watched the flame catch and hold. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I really ready? Was I sure? But the answer came quickly, certainly, yes. I touched the flame to the corner of the envelope and watched it catch. The paper curled and blackened, the fire spreading quickly, consuming the words I'd written with such care, such pain, such honesty. I watched until it was all ash, gray, and fragile, nothing left of those pages but memory. Then I turned on the water, washed it all down the drain, watched it disappear completely. It felt ceremonial, this burning, not destructive, but transformative. Taking something that had been solid and painful and necessary and allowing it to become something else, smoke, ash, gone. What remained wasn't the letter or the words or even the specific memories of writing it. What remained was the understanding it had given me, the growth it had facilitated, the closure it had provided. And that was enough. That was everything. I dried the sink, put away the matches, opened a window to let out the last wisps of smoke. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of late summer warm earth and ripening fruit, and that particular quality of fullness that August always had. The apartment felt lighter somehow, cleaner, as if burning the letter had released something that had been stuck in the walls, the air, the spaces between things. I felt lighter too. Not empty, but spacious. Like I created room for something new, though I didn't yet know what that something would be. And that was fine. I didn't need to know. Didn't need to plan or prepare or brace myself. I could simply be open, receptive, willing to let life unfold in whatever way it. The rest of that day I spent doing small, pleasurable things. I went to the farmer's market and bought fresh tomatoes and basil, peaches so ripe they left my fingers sticky. I stopped at the bookstore even though it was my day off, chatted with Mr. Holloway about the new shipment that had arrived, helped him unpack boxes because I wanted to, not because I had to. I had lunch at the Blue Moon, sitting at a table by the window with a book and a sandwich, and when the barista, a new person I didn't recognize, asked if I was waiting for anyone, I smiled and said, "No, just me," and meant it without any sadness at all. I walked through the park, watched children play, saw couples on blankets, observed families and friends and solitary readers, all occupying the same space in their different ways. The world was full of people living, loving, being. And I was one of them, neither special nor insignificant, just human, just here, just alive. That evening, as the light began to soften and the day began its slow transition toward night, I found myself back at my apartment, standing at my window as I so often did, looking out at my small corner of the world. And I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in this same spot, feeling her life fall apart, believing she'd never be whole again. I wished I could go back and tell her what I knew now, that she was stronger than she thought, that the pain wouldn't last forever, that on the other side of this loss was a kind of freedom she'd never experienced before, the freedom of being complete unto herself, of not needing another person to feel worthy or valuable or loved, that maybe she'd needed to walk through the fire herself. Maybe knowing the ending wouldn't have changed the journey. Maybe the only way to learn resilience was to be tested, to break and heal until you understood, bone deep, that you could survive anything. A year ago, I'd sat in this spot and cried. Tonight, I stood here and smiled. That was growth. That was healing. That was the proof that time did its work, slowly and invisibly, transforming pain into wisdom, loss into strength, endings into new beginnings. I'd stopped waiting for Daniel to come back, but more than that, I'd stopped waiting for my life to begin again, for happiness to return, for someone else to give me permission to be okay. I'd given myself that permission. Day by day, choice by choice, small act of courage by small act of courage. And now here I was on the other side. Not unchanged change was inevitable, but better for the changing, deeper, wiser, more fully myself. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. I watched it sink toward the horizon, this ending that was also a promise of tomorrow's beginning. Everything ended. Everything began again. That was the rhythm of life, the pattern we all lived within, whether we acknowledged it or not. Relationships ended, grief ended, waiting ended. And what came after was whatever we chose to make of it. I chose peace. I chose presence. I chose to trust that I was exactly where I needed to be, that everything that had happened, the love, the loss, the long, slow healing, had brought me to this moment, this understanding, this deep and unshakable knowledge that I was enough. Just as I was right now, in this moment and every moment after, the waiting was over. And the living, the real, full, honest living was finally, beautifully, gloriously beginning. The sky darkened completely, stars emerging one by one like promises, like possibilities, like all the futures that were waiting to be written. I stood at my window and watched them appear, these ancient lights that had witnessed everything, every love affair, every heartbreak, every ending and beginning since time began. And I felt connected to that vastness, that continuity. My story was unique to me, but it was also universal. Everyone had loved and lost. Everyone had waited and eventually stopped waiting. Everyone had believed something would last forever and learned that nothing did. But that didn't make love pointless. It didn't make connection meaningless. If anything, the temporary nature of things made them more precious, more worthy of our full presence and attention. Daniel and I had been real. Our love had been real. And the fact that it had ended didn't diminish what it had been while it lasted. I could hold both truths now, that I'd loved him deeply and that I was better off without him. That what we had mattered and that it was right for it to end. That I'd been broken by the loss and that the breaking had allowed me to rebuild myself stronger. Life wasn't either or, it was both and complex, contradictory, beautiful in its complications. I turned away from the window finally, moved into my small apartment, this space that was completely mine now, no longer haunted by the ghost of us. I reclaimed it, filled it with myself, my books, my routines, my quiet contentment. This was home. Not because someone else was here to share it with me, but because I'd chosen it, created it, made it a reflection of who I was becoming. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I prepared for bed slowly, savoring each small ritual. Washed my face with cool water, feeling it wake my skin. Brushed my teeth while looking at myself in the mirror, really seeing myself older than I'd been a year ago, maybe a little wiser, definitely more peaceful. I looked tired, but it was a good tired. The tiredness that came from having lived fully, having felt deeply, having survived something difficult and emerged on the other side. There were no tears tonight, no grief, no longing for what had been or what might have been, just acceptance, just peace, just a quiet satisfaction in having made it through. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, settled into my familiar, comfortable position. The apartment was quiet around me, the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty, pregnant with possibility rather than absence. Tomorrow, I would wake up and live another day. And the day after that, and the day after that, each one taking me further from the person I'd been when loving Daniel was the center of my world, and closer to whoever I was becoming. I didn't know who that person was yet, not entirely. She was still forming, still discovering herself, still learning what she wanted and needed and deserved. But I knew she would be okay. More than okay. She would be whole and happy and complete unto herself. She would love again eventually, but from choice rather than need. She would build a life that was rich and full and entirely her own. She would be free. And lying there in the darkness, feeling sleep begin to pull me under like a gentle tide, I realized something that made me smile. That person wasn't some future version of me I was working toward. She was already here. She was me, right now. In this moment, free, whole, complete. The waiting was over. And everything was just beginning. Sleep came easily, wrapping around me like a blanket, like comfort, like home. And in my dreams, if I dreamed at all, there was no Daniel, no past, no grief. Just open sky, just endless possibility. Just the gentle, certain knowledge that I was exactly where I needed to be. The night deepened around me, quiet and peaceful and full of stars. And I slept, deeply, completely, finally at peace. The weeks that followed the burning of the letter felt like waking up from a long, strange dream. Not the jarring kind of waking, where you're disoriented and struggling to remember where you are, but the slow, natural kind, where consciousness returns gently, bringing with it a sense of clarity and rest, where you open your eyes and recognize your surroundings and feel grateful to be exactly where you are. I moved through my days with a lightness I hadn't known I was missing. Small things brought me joy, the way morning light hit my kitchen table, the sound of rain on my roof, the weight of a new book in my hands. I'd always appreciated these things, but now I felt them more deeply, as if a layer of gauze had been removed and I was experiencing the world more directly. September arrived with its particular kind of beauty, that golden slanting light, that crisp promise of change. The leaves were just beginning to turn, touches of red and orange appearing like watercolor on the edges of green. The air had a quality to it that made you want to walk, to move, to be outside witnessing the world's transformation. I walked a lot those days. In the mornings before work, in the evenings after closing the bookstore, on weekends when time stretched open and unhurried before me. I walked without destination, without purpose beyond the act itself. Just moving through space, being present with my body and breath and the rhythm of my steps. On one of these walks, on a Sunday afternoon when the sky was impossibly blue and the air smelled of wood smoke and apples, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not the dramatic kind, not the scene where you confront the person who hurt you and grant them absolution, but the quieter kind, the kind that happens inside you when you're not even trying. When you realize one day that the anger you've been carrying has simply dissolved, leaving nothing behind but understanding. I've forgiven Daniel. I didn't know exactly when it had happened. There'd been no moment of decision, no conscious choice. It had simply occurred the way ice melts or flowers bloom, a natural process that couldn't be rushed or forced. I understood now what I hadn't been able to see while I was still in pain, that he'd done the best he could. That leaving me had probably been hard for him too, in its own way. That his choice hadn't been a reflection of my worth, but of his own needs. His own limitations, his own journey that had nothing to do with me. People made choices based on who they were and what they needed. Sometimes those choices hurt others. That was part of being human, part of living in a world where we're all the centers of our own stories, all trying to navigate toward happiness however we understood it. I couldn't blame him for choosing himself. In the end, I'd had to choose myself too. We'd both done what we needed to do to survive, to grow, to become who we were meant to be. And maybe that was the real lesson of love, not that it lasted forever, not that it always worked out, but that it taught you something essential about yourself and others. About compassion and resilience and the beautiful, terrible fragility of human connection. October came, and with it, my favorite time of year. The world was ablaze with color, every tree a masterpiece, every street a gallery. I spent my lunch breaks walking through the park, crunching through fallen leaves, breathing in the scent of autumn that always made me feel both melancholy and alive. There was something about this season that felt true to me, that matched something in my internal landscape. The acknowledgement of endings, the beauty and decline, the way things let go gracefully, releasing their hold on what they'd been to make space for what they would become. The trees didn't cling to their leaves. They simply released them when the time came, trusting in the process, knowing they'd bloom again when spring returned. I wanted to live like that. Not clinging, not grasping, but holding things lightly, appreciating them while they were here and releasing them when it was time to let go. At the bookstore, Mr. Holloway was teaching me more about the business side of things. He was getting older, he said, thinking about what would come next. He didn't say it directly, but I understood. He was considering retirement, and he was wondering if I might want to take over someday. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. To own the bookstore, to be responsible for this small sanctuary in the middle of town, to carry on Mr. Holloway's legacy of creating space for readers and dreamers and people who needed refuge from the world. You don't have to decide now, he said gently when he saw the look on my face. I'm not going anywhere yet, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about it. You belong here. You understand what this place is for? I did understand. The bookstore wasn't just a business, it was a haven, a gathering place, a reminder that there were still spaces in the world dedicated to slowness and contemplation and the careful consideration of ideas. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for trusting me, for seeing something in me." "Oh, my dear girl," he said, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. "I'm not seeing something in you. I'm seeing you, all of you. And what I see is more than capable." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and started making lists. What would I do if I owned the bookstore? What changes would I make? What would I keep the same? The planning felt good, purposeful. It gave me something to move toward, a future that was mine to shape. Not dependent on anyone else, not contingent on being chosen or wanted or loved by another person. Just mine, built by my own hands, my own vision, my own steady effort over time. November brought colder weather and earlier darkness, the long descent toward winter. I didn't mind it the way I once had. There was a coziness to these dark months, an invitation to turn inward, to rest, to let yourself be quiet and still while the world outside slowed down. I spent my evenings reading by lamplight, drinking endless cups of tea, wrapped in blankets, while the wind rattled my windows. Sometimes I wrote in my journal, processing thoughts and feelings as they arose. Sometimes I just sat, doing nothing, letting my mind wander where it would. This was something I'd learned in the past year, that doing nothing was actually doing something. That rest was productive, that stillness had value, that you didn't have to be constantly moving or achieving or improving to be worthy of your own existence. You could just be, and that was enough. My writing class with Eleanor had ended, but I kept writing. Small things, mostly observations, fragments of stories, attempts to capture moments or feelings in words. I didn't know if I'd ever show any of it to anyone. That wasn't the point. The point was the act itself, the way writing helped me understand my own thoughts, the way it transformed experience into meaning. "You're a natural," Eleanor had told me at our last class. "You have something real to say, and you're not afraid to say it honestly. That's rarer than you might think." Her words had stayed with me, a small warm coal of encouragement I carried inside. Maybe I was a writer. Maybe that was part of who I was becoming, someone who observed carefully, felt deeply, and tried to make sense of it all through language. Or maybe I was just someone who wrote sometimes, and that was fine too. I didn't need grand labels or definitions. I could simply do the things that brought me alive and not worry about what to call myself. Thanksgiving came, and I went home to my parents again. This year felt different from the last. Last year, I'd been raw, barely holding myself together, forcing smiles and deflecting questions about Daniel. This year, I was whole present, actually enjoying the holiday instead of just surviving it. My mother noticed. "You seem good," she said as we washed dishes together after dinner. "Really good, like yourself again." "I feel like myself," I told her. "Maybe more myself than I've ever been." She smiled, kissed my forehead the way she had when I was small. "Heartbreak is terrible," she said, "but it does teach you things you can't learn any other way. It shows you what you're made of." "What am I made of?" I asked, half joking. "Steel," she said without hesitation, "and grace, and a deep capacity for love even after loss. Especially after loss." That night, lying in my childhood bed under familiar blankets, looking at familiar walls, I thought about what she'd said. Steel and grace. The ability to be both strong and soft, both resilient and open. I liked that. I liked who I was becoming, this version of myself that had been forged in the fire of loss and emerged changed but not diminished. I thought about Daniel, the first time in weeks that he'd crossed my mind. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he was happy. And I found I could genuinely hope he was. Hope he'd found what he was looking for. Hope his life was full and good. Hope he'd learned and grown the way I had. There was no bitterness left, no resentment, no wish that things had gone differently. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we'd been part of each other's stories for a while, and now we weren't, and both of those things were okay. December arrived, and with it, the strange liminal space between Thanksgiving and the New Year, when time felt suspended and everyone moved through their days in a kind of dream state, already thinking ahead to what came next. The bookstore was busy with people buying gifts, looking for the perfect book for their mother or brother or best friend. I loved helping them, loved the challenge of matching person to book, loved seeing their faces light up when I suggested something they'd never heard of, but knew immediately was exactly right. "You're good at this," customers would say, and I'd smile and thank them, but inside I was thinking, yes, I am. This is what I'm meant to do. The certainty of it was new. For so long, I drifted through life, taking whatever opportunities presented themselves, never quite sure what I wanted or where I was going, but now I knew. I wanted this bookstore, this community, this life of helping people find the stories they needed. It wasn't a grand ambition. It wasn't going to change the world or make me famous or wealthy, but it was mine, and it was real, and it was enough. On the longest night of the year, the winter solstice, I stayed up until midnight. I'd read somewhere that this was a sacred time, the moment when darkness reached its peak and began its slow retreat toward light. A turning point, a threshold, a promise that even the longest night eventually ended. I sat by my window, watching the empty street below, thinking about the past year. All the darkness I'd moved through, all the nights that had felt endless, all the moments when I'd been sure I'd never feel whole again. But here I was, on the other side. The darkness was behind me now, and ahead was nothing but increasing light. I made myself a promise, sitting there in the deep night of the year. I would never again wait for someone else to choose me. I would choose myself over and over in big ways and small. I would build a life I loved, filled with people and work and experiences that nourished me. And if love came again when love came again, it would be because I was ready for it, whole and complete, not because I needed it to fill some empty space inside me, because there was no empty space, not anymore. I was full, abundant, overflowing with my own life. At midnight, I raised my mug of tea in a silent toast to myself, to my survival, to my strength. And then I went to bed, ready for the light to return, ready for all the days ahead. Christmas came and went quietly. I worked on Christmas Eve, helping last-minute shoppers, then spent Christmas Day with friends, a potluck dinner where we all brought something and sat around talking and laughing until late. It was simple and perfect and exactly what I needed: connection without pressure, celebration without expectation, just good people enjoying each other's company. Sarah, my friend who'd hosted the anti-Valentine's party, pulled me aside at one point. "You're different," she said, studying my face, lighter somehow. "Like you've let something go." "I have," I told her. "All of it. The grief, the anger, the waiting. All of it. How does it feel?" I thought about that. Like I can breathe again. Like I've been underwater and finally surfaced. She hugged me then, fierce and quick. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You did the hard work. You didn't take the easy way out. I didn't know what the easy way out would have been: staying angry, maybe, or closing myself off completely, deciding that love was too risky and never trying again. But she was right that I'd done it the hard way, staying open even when it hurt, feeling everything instead of numbing out, choosing growth over self-protection, and I was glad I had. The hard way had made me who I was now, and I liked this person. I liked her strength and her softness, her wisdom and her willingness to still be surprised, her scars and her healing. The days between Christmas and New Year's had always felt strange to me, like time outside of time, when the normal rules didn't quite apply, and you existed in a pocket universe separate from regular life. I used this time to prepare for the year ahead. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, sorted through belongings, donated things I no longer needed. I made lists, not resolutions exactly, but intentions. The things I wanted to explore, skills I wanted to develop, experiences I wanted to have. I wanted to travel, I realized. Not far necessarily, not to exotic locations, but somewhere. I wanted to see new places, meet new people, remind myself that the world was bigger than this small town, that there were other ways of living and being. I wanted to keep writing to see if I could finish a complete story instead of just fragments. I wanted to take another class, maybe pottery or painting, something that would let me create with my hands. I wanted to say yes more. To invitations, to opportunities, to experiences that scared me a little. I'd spent so long playing it safe, staying in my comfort zone. It was time to expand, to grow, to see what else I was capable of. But most of all, I wanted to keep this sense of peace I'd fought so hard to find. This groundedness, this contentment with my own company, this deep knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was. That was the foundation everything else would build on. New Year's Eve, I went to a party at the bookstore. Mr. Holloway had decided to host one, inviting regular customers and friends, creating a space for people to gather and celebrate that didn't involve loud music and heavy drinking. Instead, we had food and conversation, a record player spinning jazz, and at midnight, a champagne toast. I helped him set up, arranging chairs and tables, putting out plates of cheese and fruit, making sure everyone felt welcome. The store looked beautiful. We'd strung white lights along the shelves, and they cast everything in a warm, gentle glow. People arrived gradually, filling the space with their presence and laughter. I saw familiar faces, customers I'd helped over the years, members of the reading group, Eleanor from my writing class, Sarah, and other friends. The evening unfolded easily, naturally. Conversation sparked and flowed. People moved between groups. The record player kept the mood light and festive. I found myself talking to a man I'd never met before, a friend of Mr. Holloway's who taught literature at the community college. His name was James, and he had kind eyes and an easy laugh, and we talked about books for 20 minutes before the conversation shifted to other things, his work, my role at the bookstore, the strange liminal quality of this night between years. "Do you make resolutions?" he asked. "Not really. Intentions, maybe. Ways I want to be rather than specific things I want to do." "That's wise," he said. "I've never been good at the resolution thing. I always feel like I'm setting myself up to fail. Or maybe we're all just always in process," I suggested. "Always becoming, never quite arrived. And that's okay. That's human." He smiled. "I like that. The becoming is the point." "Exactly." We talked until just before midnight, when Mr. Holloway called everyone together for the countdown. He distributed glasses of champagne, raised his own, and said, "To another year of stories, to new chapters and happy endings and everything in between, to stories." We all echoed, and then someone started counting down from 10, and we all joined in, voices rising together, marking the moment when 1 year became another. 3.2.1. Happy New Year. Glasses clinked, people hugged and kissed cheeks, and I stood there in the middle of it all, surrounded by books and friends and the warm light of possibility, and I felt genuinely happy. This was my life. This right here. Not the one I'd imagined when I was with Daniel, but a different one. Better in some ways because it was entirely mine. James caught my eye across the room and raised his glass to me specifically, a small private gesture of acknowledgement. I raised mine back, smiling. Maybe something would come of that. Maybe we'd become friends, or more than friends. Or maybe we'd just have had one good conversation on New Year's Eve and nothing more. And all of those possibilities were fine. I wasn't waiting for anything specific anymore. I was just here, present, open to whatever unfolded. January settled in, cold and quiet, the world hibernating under gray skies and occasional snow. I fell into the rhythm of the New Year work, walks, writing, reading, time with friends. Simple routines that shaped my days and gave them structure and meaning. I kept thinking about what I'd said to James. The becoming is the point. It had felt true when I said it, but now I understood it more deeply. We were never finished, never complete, never done becoming who we were. Life was a constant process of growth and change and adaptation. And that wasn't something to be frustrated by. It was something to embrace, to celebrate. The fact that I was different now than I'd been a year ago was good. It meant I was alive, responsive, learning. I thought about the woman who'd fallen in love with Daniel, who'd believed he was her person, her future, her everything. She'd been so sure, so certain of how the story would go. And she'd been wrong, but that was okay. Being wrong didn't mean she'd failed. It just meant life had other plans, other lessons, other directions for her to grow. I felt tenderness toward her, toward that younger, more naive version of myself. She'd done her best. She'd loved with her whole heart, and when love had ended, she'd survived. She'd learned. She'd become someone stronger and wiser and more complete. That was all any of us could do: love when we could, grieve when we must, learn what the experience had to teach us, and keep going. On a Tuesday in late January, I went to the river again. It had been months since my last visit, that evening in July when I'd reclaimed the space from memory. Now it was deep winter, the water moving slowly beneath a skin of ice, the willows bare and skeletal against a white sky. I walked carefully along the frozen bank, my breath visible in the cold air. Everything was so different from that summer evening when Daniel and I had been here, so changed that it was almost hard to believe it was the same place. But maybe that was the point. Places changed. People changed. Nothing stayed the same, no matter how much we might wish it would. I found our spot, or what had been our spot, though it didn't feel like ours anymore. Just a patch of ground like any other, notable only for the memories I'd assigned to it. I stood there for a long time, looking at the river, the trees, the vast expanse of winter sky, and I said goodbye. Not to Daniel, I'd already done that, multiple times in multiple ways, but to the story of us, to the dream of who we might have been together, to the future I'd imagined and then had to release. I said goodbye to the pain and the longing and the slow, hard work of healing. I said goodbye to the woman who deep and broken here, and hello to the woman who was whole again, standing in the same place but so fundamentally changed that she was barely recognizable. Thank you, I whispered to the river, to the trees, to the cold winter air. Thank you for holding this, for witnessing it, for being here while I fell apart and came back together. The river kept flowing beneath its ice. The trees stood silent and patient. The sky watched without judgment. And I turned away from that place and walked back toward town, toward my life, toward everything that was waiting for me in the present and future instead of the past. February brought Valentine's Day again, the second one since Daniel left. Last year, it had been hard, all those reminders of romance, of coupling, of love. This year, I barely noticed it. Just another day, just another series of hours to move through with presence and intention. Sarah called me that evening. Want to do movie night again? Keep our anti-Valentine's tradition alive? I thought about it and smiled. Actually, I think I'm okay tonight. Just going to stay in, read, early to bed. Look at you, she said, and I could hear the approval in her voice. Not needing the distraction anymore. Not needing the distraction, I agreed. That night, alone in my apartment, I made myself a nice dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and a glass of wine. I ate slowly, savoring it, then settled on my couch with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The evening passed quietly, peacefully. No tears, no sadness, no wishing things were different. Just contentment with what was, with who I was, with the life I built. At one point, I found myself thinking about love, not Daniel specifically, but love in general. What it meant, what it required, what it gave, and what it took away. I realized I wasn't scared of it anymore. For a while, I had been scared to open my heart again, scared to risk feeling that kind of pain again, scared that I'd lose myself the way I'd lost myself in loving Daniel. But I understood now that the problem hadn't been love itself. It had been the way I'd loved making someone else my center, giving away my power, waiting for them to validate my existence. I wouldn't love like that again. Couldn't even if I wanted to. I've learned too much, grown too much, become too fully myself to shrink back down into that smaller version of love. Would I loved again? And I would. I was sure that now it would be different. Adult, balanced. Two whole people choosing to share space while maintaining their own centers, their own lives, their own sense of self. That was the kind of love worth having, the kind worth waiting for. Not that I was waiting. Not in the old sense, the desperate hoping and watching and wishing, but in the sense that I was preparing myself, becoming the kind of person who could sustain that kind of love, building a life so full and rich and meaningful that a partner would be an addition, not a necessity. March came with its particular brand of hope, mud, and rain, and that first tentative warmth. The world slowly waking from its winter sleep. Mr. Holloway sat me down one afternoon when the store was quiet and told me, officially what he'd been hinting at for months. He was retiring at the end of the year, and he wanted me to take over the bookstore. I've talked to my lawyer, he said. We can structure it however you need a loan, a payment plan, however makes sense for you financially. The important thing is that this place stays what it is, and I trust you to make sure that happens. I felt tears prick my eyes. Mr. Holloway, this is incredible. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, he said. You belong here. You understand what this place means. And you have ideas. I've seen them, heard them for how to make it even better while keeping its heart intact. That's rare. That's special. We spent the next few weeks working out the details, the numbers, the timeline, the transition plan. It felt surreal, like a dream I'd had that was suddenly manifesting in reality. I would own the bookstore. This sanctuary, this haven, this place that had been my refuge during the hardest year of my life would be mine to steward and grow and share. The responsibility felt enormous, but I was ready for it, more than ready. I'd spent the past year learning who I was, what I was capable of, what I wanted to build with my life. This was it. This was what I was meant to do. April brought rain and blossoms, the trees suddenly alive with white and pink flowers that lasted only days before falling like snow. I walked through streets carpeted with petals and felt that bittersweet awareness of beauty and impermanence existing simultaneously. Nothing lasted. Everything changed. And that was what made it precious. I'd been writing more, working on a longer piece, something that was starting to feel like it might become an actual story. It was loosely based on my experience, a woman learning to be alone after a breakup, finding herself again, discovering that she was enough. But it wasn't memoir. It was fiction, transmuted and transformed, the raw material of my life shaped into something new, something that belonged to everyone and no one. Eleanor had agreed to read what I had so far. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning, and she handed back my pages covered in notes and suggestions. "This is good," she said, "really good. You're not just telling the story, you're making the reader feel it. That's the hardest thing to do, and you're doing it naturally." Her praise made me glow inside. "Thank you. That means a lot. Keep going," she said. "Finish it. Even if no one ever reads it, finish it for yourself. You need to see this story through to its end." I promised I would. And I meant it. The story mine and not mine, true and invented, deserved to be completed. Deserved to have its ending written, its arc fulfilled. Just like I was writing the ending of my own story with Daniel, giving it closure and meaning and release. May arrived with warmth and light, the world fully alive again, everything green and growing and possible. I spent a weekend helping my parents with their garden, digging in the earth, planting seeds, feeling the sun on my shoulders and the dirt under my fingernails. There was something deeply satisfying about this work, so physical, so connected to the earth's cycles, so hopeful. You planted seeds not knowing exactly what would grow, trusting in the process and the soil's richness, in the plant's innate wisdom about what it needed to become. That was life too. You did your best, created good conditions, and then you had to trust. Trust that things would unfold as they were meant to. Trust that you had what you needed. Trust that even when things didn't go according to plan, you'd find your way. My mother and I worked in companionable silence, and then she said, "You know, I'm proud of how you handled everything with Daniel." I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't, I agreed. But I'm glad it happened. Not the heartbreak itself, but ... what it taught me. Who I became because of it, that's wisdom, she said. Being grateful for the lessons, even when the process of learning them hurt. Most people never get there. They stay bitter, or they armor up, or they just shut down completely. I almost did that, I admitted. Almost decided it was safer to never risk it again, but you didn't. No, I didn't. She squeezed my hand, leaving a smudge of dirt. That's my brave girl. I carried those words with me like a talisman. Brave. Not because I'd never been scared, but because I'd been scared and done the hard thing anyway. June brought my 25th birthday, another marker of time passing, another milestone reached. I celebrated quietly dinner with friends, a day off from the bookstore to do whatever I wanted. I chose to spend it outside, hiking a trail I'd never explored, pushing myself physically, feeling strong and capable and alive. At the summit, a modest peak, nothing dramatic, but high enough to see for miles, I sat on a flat rock and ate the sandwich I depacked. Below me, the town spread out small and contained, and beyond it, the world stretched on and on, full of places I'd never been, people I'd never met, experiences I'd never had. I felt the bigness of it all, the vastness of possibility, and I felt my own smallness, but not in a diminishing way, in a way that was freeing. I was one person, one small life among billions, and that meant the pressure was off. I didn't have to be everything, do everything, know everything. I just had to be me, fully, honestly, courageously me, and that was enough. That was everything. July brought heat and long days, and with it, the second anniversary of that first date with Daniel. 2 years since I'd sat in a blue moon, nervous and hopeful, falling in love with a man who would teach me so much about myself, both through his presence and his absence. I marked the day by going back to that cafe, sitting at that same table by the window, ordering chamomile tea with honey just like I had that first time. But this time I was alone, by choice, and I was okay with that, more than okay. I sat there with my tea and a book, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for who I'd been then, open and vulnerable and willing to risk. Gratitude for what I'd learned about love and loss and the resilience of the human heart. Gratitude for who I'd become, strong and soft, wounded and healed, complete unto herself. Daniel had been a chapter in my story, an important one, but just a chapter, not the whole book. And the story was continuing without him, unfolding in ways I could never have predicted, taking me places I'd never expected to go. That was the beauty of it, the surprise. The constant revelation of what came next. August arrived, marking 2 full years since the breakup. I took the day off work and spent it in quiet reflection. Not mourning, there was no more grief to process, no more pain to work through. Just remembering, honoring what had been and what had come from it. I thought about writing another letter, but I didn't need to. Everything I'd needed to say, I'd said. Everything I'd needed to release, I'd released. Instead, I wrote in my journal a simple entry. 2 years ago, my heart broke. Today it's whole, not unchanged. There are scars, thin places where the breaking happened, tender spots that probably always will be, but whole nonetheless. I learned that you can survive things you think will destroy you. That time really does heal, even when you can't believe it will. That you can love someone and lose them and still be okay, still be yourself, still be capable of joy. I learned that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can be my own home, my own refuge, my own source of comfort. That I don't need another person to complete me because I was never incomplete. I learned that endings are also beginnings, that every door that closes opens another, that life is constantly offering us chances to become new versions of ourselves if we be brave enough to take them. Thank you, Daniel, for being part of my story, for loving me as well as you could, for leaving when you needed to. For teaching me, through both presence and absence, what I'm capable of enduring and becoming. I wish you well. I genuinely hope you're happy, and I'm grateful that our paths crossed, even though they ultimately diverged. But mostly, I'm grateful to myself for not giving up, for doing the hard work, for choosing growth over bitterness, openness over armor, hope over fear. I'm proud of who I've become, and I'm excited to see who I'll continue to become, day by day, choice by choice, brave act by brave act. The waiting is over. The healing is done, and the rest of my life is just beginning. I closed the journal, set down my pen, and sat in the quiet of my apartment. Outside, it was a beautiful day, sunny and warm, perfect late summer weather. The kind of day that felt like a gift, like the world offering up its best. I decided to accept that gift, to go outside, to be present with the beauty, to live fully in this moment without worrying about the next one. I grabbed a book and walked to the park, found my favorite spot under the old oak tree, settled in to read. Around me, life continued, children playing, dogs chasing balls, couples walking hand in hand, solitary readers like me finding small pockets of peace. We were all just living, all just doing our best, all just moving through our days with whatever grace and courage we could muster, and that was enough. That was beautiful. That was the whole point. September came again, the third autumn since I'd met Daniel, the second since he'd left. The bookstore transition was well underway. Mr. Holloway was training me on everything, the business side, the relationships with distributors, the financial planning, all the invisible work that went into keeping this place running. It was a lot to learn, but I loved every minute of it. This was my future, tangible and real, something I was building with my own hands and heart and vision. "You're going to do beautifully," Mr. Holloway said one evening as we locked up together. "Better than I ever did, probably. You have fresh ideas, new energy. This place is going to thrive under your care." "I hope so," I said. "I want to honor what you've built while also making it my own." "That's exactly right," he said. "Honor the past, but don't be trapped by it. Let this place grow and change with you." His words stayed with me. Honor the past, but don't be trapped by it. That was true for the bookstore, and it was true for my life too. I'd honored my relationship with Daniel, acknowledged its importance, grieved its ending, learned from it. But I wasn't trapped by it anymore, wasn't defined by it, wasn't living in its shadow. I was free to move forward, to create something new, to write the next chapters of my story however I chose. October arrived with its stunning display of color, and I found myself thinking about cycles, how the same seasons returned year after year, familiar but never quite the same. How we moved through similar experiences again and again, but each time we were different, changed by everything that had come before. This October, I was not the person I'd been last October or the October before that. I'd been stripped down and rebuilt, broken open and healed, lost and found. And I was grateful for all of it. Every painful moment, every tear, every dark night when I thought I'd never feel whole again. Because those experiences had made me who I was now, deeper, wiser, more compassionate, more alive. I spent a Sunday afternoon organizing my bookshelves at home, a task I'd been meaning to do for months. As I handled each book, I remembered when I read it, what I'd been feeling, what it had meant to me at that particular moment in my life. Some books I'd read with Daniel, curled up beside him on his couch, or mine. Those gave me a small pang, but nothing more. They were just books, just stories, just objects that had been present during a certain time. I kept them on my shelves, not as shrines to what had been, but simply because they were good books, worthy of keeping, part of my collection. That felt like progress. Being able to keep things that had associations with him without those associations overwhelming the things themselves. Being able to separate memory from meaning, past from present. As I worked, organizing by author and genre, creating order from chaos, I thought about how this was a metaphor for what I'd done with my whole life over the past 2 years. Taken everything apart, examined each piece, decided what to keep and what to release, then put it all back together in a new configuration that made sense for who I was now. The result wasn't perfect. There were gaps, places where things didn't quite fit, compromises made for the sake of space and practicality. But it was mine, and it was good, and it would continue to evolve as I acquired new books, new experiences, new understanding. November brought the holidays again, but this year I felt no dread, no anxiety about facing them alone. I'd learned something important. Alone and lonely were not the same thing. You could be alone and peaceful, alone and content, alone and full of joy. Loneliness was a feeling, not a circumstance. It was about disconnection, not solitude. And I wasn't disconnected. I had friends, family, community. I had meaningful work and creative pursuits and a life that felt rich and full. I had myself, and I'd learned that was actually quite good company. Thanksgiving with my parents was warm and easy. We cooked together, laughed together, sat around the table sharing what we were grateful for. When it was my turn, I said, I'm grateful for the hard year I had, for everything it taught me, for who I became because of it. My father reached over and squeezed my hand. My mother's eyes glistened with tears. That's real wisdom, my father said. Being grateful for the difficulties. Most people never get there. I almost didn't, I admitted. There were times I thought I'd be bitter forever. But bitterness takes so much energy. Gratitude is lighter, easier to carry. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I felt a deep sense of peace. I'd come so far from the person who'd lain here 2 years ago, raw and broken, barely holding herself together. That version of me had survived. And more than survived, she'd grown, transformed, become someone she could be proud of. I sent her a silent message of love and gratitude. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for doing the hard work. Look at who we've become. Look at what we've built. You did this. We did this. December came with its particular magic. The lights, the music, the way everything felt softer and more tender, as if the world itself was opening its heart. The bookstore was beautiful, decorated with garlands and lights, filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. We'd created a holiday display of staff favorites, books we loved and wanted to share, each with a handwritten note about why we'd chosen it. Customers lingered, browsing slowly, asking for recommendations. I loved these conversations, loved connecting people with stories that might change them, comfort them, challenge them, delight them. This was more than a job. It was a calling, a purpose, a way of being in the world that felt aligned with everything I valued. On Christmas Eve, after we closed, Mr. Holloway handed me a small wrapped package. For you, he said, a thank you. For everything you've brought to this place. Inside was a key old brass, beautiful attached to a simple chain. It's from the original store, he explained. From when my grandfather opened it in 1952. I've kept it all these years. And now I want you to have it. As a reminder that you're part of a legacy, a continuing story that's bigger than any one person. I felt tears slide down my cheeks. Mr. Holloway, I don't know what to say. Say you'll take care of this place the way I know you will. Say you'll keep it a sanctuary for readers and dreamers and people who need refuge from the world. I will. I promised. I absolutely will. That night, I put the key on its chain and wore it around my neck. It felt right there, like it belonged, like it had been waiting all this time to come to me. I was part of something larger than myself, part of a tradition of creating space for stories, for quiet, for the kind of deep engagement with ideas and emotions that books allowed. This was my purpose. This was what I was meant to do. And I was so grateful to have found it, to have been given this opportunity, to have been trusted with this legacy. New Year's Eve came, and this time I didn't go to a party. I chose to stay home to spend the transition from one year to the next in quiet reflection. I made myself a nice dinner, lit candles, put on soft music. And as midnight approached, I sat at my window, looking out at the street below where a few people were making their way to parties or coming home from them. I thought about the past year, the growth, the learning, the slow, steady building of a life I loved. I thought about the year before that, the pain, the healing, the gradual return to wholeness. And I thought about the year ahead unknown, full of possibility, waiting to be written. At midnight, I didn't make resolutions. Instead, I made a commitment to myself to keep choosing growth, to keep staying open, to keep building a life that was authentic and meaningful and entirely mine. I committed to being brave in small ways every day, to taking risks, to saying yes to things that scared me a little, to staying present even when it was uncomfortable, to loving fully when the time came without holding back, trusting that I was strong enough now to survive whatever happened. I committed to honoring my past while not being trapped by it, to carrying my experiences as wisdom rather than wounds, to being grateful for everything, the joy and the pain, the love and the loss, the moments of certainty and the long periods of doubt. All of it had made me who I was, and who I was enough. As the new year officially began, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for all of it, for the breaking and the healing, the ending and the beginning, the love I had and the love I lost, and the love I'll find again someday. Thank you for this life, this chance, this continuing story. I won't waste it. I promise." January arrived cold and fresh, a clean slate, a new beginning. I threw myself into preparing for the bookstore ownership transition. There were legal documents to sign, financial arrangements to finalize, plans to make for how I'd run things once Mr. Holloway officially retired. It kept me busy, but in a good way, a purposeful way. I was building something, creating something, investing in a future that was real and tangible. James, the man I talked to at the New Year's party a year ago, had become a friend. We got coffee occasionally, talked about books and teaching and life. There was an ease between us, a comfort that felt like it could become something more if I wanted it to. But I wasn't rushing anything, wasn't trying to force a relationship to develop just because it might be nice to have one. I was letting it unfold naturally without pressure or expectation. And that felt right, healthy, adult. If something romantic developed with James or someone else, wonderful. If it didn't, that was fine too. I was complete as I was, and anything else would be an addition, not a necessity. That was the real gift of the past 2 years, learning that I didn't need a partner to be happy, whole, or fulfilled. that I could create a life I loved entirely on my own, that my worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose me. I chose me every day in 1,000 small ways. And that was all that mattered. February brought Valentine's Day again, the third one since Daniel left. I'd stopped counting them, stopped marking them as milestones. They were just days now, no more or less significant than any other. This year, I spent the evening working on my story, the one I'd been writing and revising for months. It was nearly done, just a few more scenes to write, some final polishing to do. Eleanor had offered to help me submit it to literary journals when it was ready. "This deserves to be read," she'd said. "It's too good to sit in a drawer." The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Putting my work out into the world meant making myself vulnerable, risking rejection, allowing others to judge something I'd poured my heart into. But I was going to do it anyway, because that's what brave people did. They created despite the fear, shared despite the risk, stayed open despite the possibility of pain. I've learned that lesson well. March brought the first real warmth of spring, and with it, a sense of renewal, of beginning again. The bookstore officially became mine on March 15th. We had a small ceremony, just me, Mr. Holloway, a few close friends. He handed me the keys, gave me a hug that felt like a blessing, and said, "It's yours now. Make it wonderful." "I will, I promise," my voice thick with emotion. That evening, after everyone had left, I stood alone in the bookstore in my bookstore and looked around at the shelves of books. The worn wooden floors, the comfortable chairs, the walls that had witnessed so many quiet moments of connection between readers and stories. This was mine to care for now, mine to grow and nurture and share with the community. Mine to fill with love and intention and the particular magic that only bookstores possessed. I felt the weight of the responsibility, but I also felt ready for it, more than ready. This was what I was meant to do, where I was meant to be. I walked through the space slowly, touching spines of books, straightening a few that had been left askew. And I made promises to the books, to the space, to myself. I promised to honor what Mr. Holloway had built while also making it my own. To create a space that was welcoming to everyone. To curate carefully, thoughtfully, choosing books that mattered, that challenged, that comforted, that transformed. I promised to pay my staff fairly, to treat them with respect, to create a workplace that was nourishing and supportive, to be present, engaged, invested in every aspect of the business. I promised to keep learning, growing, evolving, to stay open to new ideas while remaining true to the core values that made this place special. And I promised to remember where I'd come from, the heartbreak that had brought me to my knees, the healing that had required everything. I had the growth that had transformed me into someone capable of standing here, owning this dream, living this life. I would never forget that journey. Never take for granted how far I'd come. Never stop being grateful for the second chance, the new beginning, the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been. April brought rain and blossoms, the world waking up fully now, stretching into its new season. My story was finished. After months of writing and revising, of cutting and reshaping and polishing, it was done, complete, ready to send out into the world. January arrived cold and fresh, a clean slate, a new beginning. I threw myself into preparing for the bookstore ownership transition. There were legal documents to sign, financial arrangements to finalize, plans to make for how I'd run things once Mr. Holloway officially retired. It kept me busy, but in a good way, a purposeful way. I was building something, creating something, investing in a future that was real and tangible. James, the man I'd talked to at the New Year's party a year ago, had become a friend. We got coffee occasionally, talked about books and teaching and life. There was an ease between us, a comfort that felt like it could become something more if I wanted it to. But I wasn't rushing anything, wasn't trying to force a relationship to develop just because it might be nice to have one. I was letting it unfold naturally without pressure or expectation. And that felt right, healthy, adult. If something romantic developed with James or someone else, wonderful. If it didn't, that was fine too. I was complete as I was, and anything else would be an addition, not a necessity. That was the real gift of the past 2 years, learning that I didn't need a partner to be happy, whole, or fulfilled. That I could create a life I loved entirely on my own. That my worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose me. I chose me, every day in 1,000 small ways. And that was all that mattered. February brought Valentine's Day again, the third one since Daniel left. I'd stopped counting them, stopped marking them as milestones. They were just days now, no more or less significant than any other. This year, I spent the evening working on my story, the one I'd been writing and revising for months. It was nearly done, just a few more scenes to write, some final polishing to do. Eleanor had offered to help me submit it to literary journals when it was ready. "This deserves to be read," she'd said. "It's too good to sit in a drawer." The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Putting my work out into the world meant making myself vulnerable, risking rejection, allowing others to judge something I'd poured my heart into. But I was going to do it anyway, because that's what brave people did. They created despite the fear, shared despite the risk, stayed open despite the possibility of pain. I've learned that lesson well. March brought the first real warmth of spring, and with it, a sense of renewal, of beginning again. The bookstore officially became mine on March 15th. We had a small ceremony, just me, Mr. Holloway, a few close friends. He handed me the keys, gave me a hug that felt like a blessing, and said, "It's yours now. Make it wonderful." "I will, I promise," my voice thick with emotion. That evening, after everyone had left, I stood alone in the bookstore in my bookstore and looked around at the shelves of books. The worn wooden floors, the comfortable chairs, the walls that had witnessed so many quiet moments of connection between readers and stories. This was mine to care for now, mine to grow and nurture and share with the community, mine to fill with love and intention and the particular magic that only bookstores possessed. I felt the weight of the responsibility, but I also felt ready for it, more than ready. This was what I was meant to do, where I was meant to be. I walked through the space slowly, touching spines of books, straightening a few that had been left askew. And I made promises to the books, to the space, to myself. I promised to honor what Mr. Holloway had built while also making it my own. To create a space that was welcoming to everyone. To curate carefully, thoughtfully, choosing books that mattered, that challenged, that comforted, that transformed. I promised to pay my staff fairly, to treat them with respect, to create a workplace that was nourishing and supportive, to be present, engaged, invested in every aspect of the business. I promised to keep learning, growing, evolving, to stay open to new ideas while remaining true to the core values that made this place special. And I promised to remember where I'd come from, The heartbreak that had brought me to my knees, the healing that had required everything. I had the growth that had transformed me into someone capable of standing here, owning this dream, living this life. I would never forget that journey. Never take for granted how far I'd come. Never stop being grateful for the second chance, the new beginning, the opportunity to build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been. April brought rain and blossoms, the world waking up fully now, stretching into its new season. My story was finished. After months of writing and revising, of cutting and reshaping and polishing, it was done, complete, ready to send out into the world. One evening in late August, James and I had dinner together at the little Italian place on the edge of town. We'd been seeing more of each other lately, not officially dating, but definitely more than just friends. There was an affection between us, a tenderness, a sense that we were moving toward something without rushing it. Over dessert, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I like you," he said simply, "more than like you. And I've been wanting to say that for a while, but I didn't want to pressure you. I know you've been through a lot, and I want to respect your pace." I looked at her hands, his wrapped around mine, warm and solid and real. And I felt ready, not scared, not hesitant. "Ready, I like you too," I said, "more than like you. And I think I'm ready to see where this goes." He smiled, that warm, genuine smile I'd come to appreciate so much. Yeah. We finished our dessert, paid the bill, walked out into the warm August evening. And when he kissed me goodnight, soft, sweet, full of promise, I kissed him back without holding anything in reserve. I was here, I was present, I was all in. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted him. Because I was complete on my own and choosing to share space with someone who saw me, valued me, met me as an equal. This was what healthy love looked like. And I was ready for it. September came again, another turning of the wheel, another autumn beginning. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply, contentedly happy. Not the desperate, clinging happiness that came from needing external validation, but the steady, quiet happiness that came from being at peace with yourself and your life. I had work I loved, friends who supported me, a growing relationship with James that felt healthy and balanced and good, a community I was part of, contributing to, invested in, and most importantly, I had myself. Whole, healed, strong, soft, all of it. The parts that had been broken and the parts that had never broken, the scars and the smooth places. The wisdom earned through pain and the innocence I'd somehow managed to keep despite everything. I was enough. I'd always been enough. But now I knew it bone deep, soul sure. That was the real gift of the past 3 years. Not the relationship with James, not the bookstore, not any external achievement or acquisition. But this internal knowing, this unshakable sense of my own worth and completeness. Nobody could take that from me. No loss, no rejection, no heartbreak. It was mine, earned through fire, tested by pain, proven true by survival. I was enough. And that was everything. One evening in October, as I was closing up the bookstore, I found myself thinking about Daniel. Not with longing or regret, not with anger or bitterness. Just with a gentle, distant fondness, the way you might think about an old friend you'd lost touch with but still remembered warmly. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he was happy. And I found I genuinely hoped he was. Hoped he'd found what he was looking for, hoped his life was full and good, hoped he'd grown and learned the way I had. We'd been important to each other once. We'd loved each other as well as we knew how. And then we'd gone our separate ways, and that was okay. That was how some stories ended, not with drama or tragedy, but with a simple parting of paths, two people heading in different directions. I sent him a silent blessing, not a prayer exactly, but a wish. Be well, be happy, be at peace. Thank you for what you gave me, for what you taught me, for being part of my story. I release you with love. I release us with gratitude. Go in peace. And then I let even that thought go, released it into the universe, and went back to my present moment, my current life, my now. November brought Thanksgiving again, and this year I hosted. Friends gathered in my small apartment. It was crowded, chaotic, full of laughter and good food and warmth. James was there, comfortable in my space, easy with my friends, fitting in naturally. When we went around saying what we were grateful for, I found myself almost overwhelmed by how much I had to be thankful for. I'm grateful for second chances, I said when it was my turn, for the opportunity to rebuild after loss, for learning that endings are also beginnings. For everyone here, for this community, for this life I get to live. My voice cracked slightly on the last words, emotion rising. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. We're grateful for you too, she said. For your strength, your openness, your willingness to keep your heart available even after it was broken. You inspire us. I blinked back tears, looked around at these faces I loved, these people who'd witnessed my journey and cheered me on. This was family, not by blood, but by choice, by showing up, by being present for each other through the hard times and the good. I was so lucky, so blessed, so grateful to be here in this moment with these people living this life. December came with its familiar magic, and this year I embraced it fully. The bookstore looked beautiful. We'd gone all out with decorations, creating a winter wonderland that delighted customers and made the space feel even more magical than usual. Christmas Eve, I closed up early and went to James's apartment, where we exchanged gifts and cooked dinner together and watched the snow fall outside his windows. He gave me a journal, beautiful, leather-bound, with blank pages waiting to be filled. For your next story, he said, whatever it might be. I gave him a first edition of his favorite novel, one I'd hunted for months to find. You're amazing, he said, holding it reverently. How did you even find this? I have my ways, I said with a smile. Bookstore owner privileges. We kissed under the string lights he'd hung in his living room, and I felt that flutter in my chest that came with new. Love with possibility, with the sweet uncertainty of not knowing exactly where this was going, but trusting it anyway. This was different from Daniel. Slower, steadier, more grounded. Less fireworks, more growing warmth. Less desperate intensity, more comfortable ease. I liked it, loved it, actually. This felt sustainable, adult, real. This felt like it could last. Not that I was counting on it lasting. I'd learned that lesson. Nothing was guaranteed, nothing was permanent, but I could hope. I could be open to the possibility. I could invest in it while still maintaining my own center, my own completeness. I could love James without losing myself. And that made all the difference. New Year's Eve, we went to a party together, not at the bookstore this time, but at a friend's house, something casual and fun. At midnight, when everyone around us was kissing and cheering, James pulled me close and said, I think this is going to be a good year. For both of us. I think so too, I agreed. And as we kissed, as the new year officially began, I felt a deep sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was meant to be, with exactly who I was meant to be with, living exactly the life I was meant to be living. Not perfect, not without challenges or difficulties or moments of doubt, but right, true, aligned. This was my life. And it was good. The weeks that followed brought their own rhythm, their own small joys and challenges. The bookstore continued to thrive. My relationship with James deepened, became more committed, more serious. We talked about the future in concrete terms, not marriage yet, but moving in together maybe, combining our lives more fully, building something together. And through it all, I maintained myself. My friendships, my creative pursuits, my solitary time, my need for quiet and reflection. I didn't disappear into the relationship the way I had with Daniel. I stayed present, stayed whole, stayed me. That was the difference. That was the growth. That was the proof that I'd learned the lesson heartbreak had come to teach me. One afternoon in March, I got an email from one of the literary journals I'd submitted my story to. They wanted to publish it. I read the email 3 times, unable to quite believe it. My story, the one I'd poured my heart into, the one that was so personal, so vulnerable, was going to be published. Read by strangers. Out in the world, I called Eleanor immediately. "I told you," she said, her voice warm with pride. "I told you it was good enough. Congratulations, my dear. You've earned this." I called James next, then Sarah, then my parents. Everyone was thrilled, excited, proud. But the person I was most proud to tell was myself. I'd done it. I'd taken my pain and transformed it into art. I found meaning in loss, beauty in brokenness, wisdom in suffering. I'd survived heartbreak and come out the other side, not just intact, but better, stronger, more fully myself. And now my story, our story, mine and Daniel's, though he'd never know it, would help others who were going through what I'd been through. Would remind them that they could survive, that they would heal, that endings were also beginnings. That felt like completion, like the circle closing, like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. On a warm evening in late April, 4 years almost to the day since I'd first met Daniel, I sat at my window looking out at the street below. The world was in full bloom, trees heavy with blossoms, flowers erupting from window boxes and planters, everything green and alive and possible. I thought about the woman I'd been 4 years ago. So young, so hopeful, so naive about what love required and what loss could take from you. She'd been through so much since then, fallen in love, had her heart broken, learned to be alone, rebuilt herself from the ground up, found her purpose, opened her heart again. She'd survived, and more than that, she'd thrived. I felt such tenderness toward her, such pride, such gratitude. She'd done the hard work. She'd chosen growth over bitterness, openness over armor, love over fear. And now here she was here. I was living a life I'd never imagined, better than anything I could have planned, rich and full and entirely my own. I picked up my journal, not the one James had given me, but an older one, nearly full now, and I wrote one final entry about Daniel, about us, about everything I've learned. Dear Daniel, I'm writing to you one last time, though you'll never read these words. This isn't for you anyway. It's for me. A final act of release, a closing of the circle, an acknowledgement of everything you were to me and everything you helped me become. 4 years ago, I fell in love with you. 3 years ago, you left. And in the time since, I've learned more about myself, about love, about life than I ever could have if we'd stayed together. So thank you. Thank you for loving me as well as you could. Thank you for showing me what I was capable of feeling. Thank you for leaving when you needed to, even though it broke my heart, because that breaking opened me up in ways I never could have predicted. I'm happy now, genuinely, deeply happy. Not because of someone else, though James is wonderful and I'm grateful for him, but because I learned how to be happy on my own, how to be complete without needing another person to make me whole. You didn't take that from me when you left. You gave it to me, ironically, through your absence. You taught me that I was strong enough to survive loss, brave enough to stay open afterward, worthy enough to build a life I loved entirely on my own. I hope you're happy too. I genuinely do. I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope your life is full and good and everything you wanted it to be. And I release you completely, finally, with love and gratitude and peace. You were part of my story, an important part, but just a part, not the whole book. And the story continues without you, unfolding in beautiful and unexpected ways, taking me places I never imagined I'd go. Thank you for the chapter we wrote together. Thank you for the lessons that came from its ending. Thank you for being exactly who you were, because that's what I needed, not who I thought I needed, but who I actually needed to become who I am now. I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful to be done waiting, done looking backward, done giving you space in my present. You belong to my past now. And my past is at peace, so this is goodbye. Real goodbye. Final goodbye. Go well. Be happy. Live fully. And thank you for everything. Goodbye, Daniel. And thank you for loving me, even imperfectly, even temporarily, even though it ended. Thank you. I closed the journal, set it aside, sat in the quiet of my apartment. Outside, the world continued. People walked by, lived their lives, carried their own stories. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, promising another tomorrow. And I felt complete, at peace, grateful. The waiting was over, the healing was done, the story was told. And what came next was mine to write, mine to live, mine to create with intention and presence and love. I stood from my chair, walked to the window, opened it. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of spring, of growth, of new beginnings. I took a deep breath, held it, released it slowly. And then I spoke out loud, softly, a whisper into the universe. Thank you. Thank you for this life, this journey, this becoming. Thank you for the love I had and the love I lost and the love I've found again. Thank you for the breaking and the healing, the ending and the beginning, the pain that taught me and the joy that sustains me. Thank you for making me strong enough to survive and soft enough to stay open. Thank you for all of it. I paused, breathed, felt the evening air on my face. Thank you, Daniel, for being part of my story. I release you with love. I release us with gratitude, though in peace. Another breath, deeper this time. And thank you to myself for not giving up, for doing the hard work, for choosing growth and healing and love over and over, even when it was scary. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful for you. You are enough. You always were. The words hung in the air for a moment, then dissolved, carried away on the breeze. And I felt lighter, freer, complete. I closed the window gently, turned back to my apartment, my home, my sanctuary, my life. Tomorrow I would wake and live another day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each one a gift, each one an opportunity, each one mine to create. But tonight, I would simply be present, peaceful, grateful. Tonight, I would rest in the knowing that I was exactly where I needed to be, that the waiting was over, that the healing was complete, that I was whole. And so, dear listener, this is where I leave you. Not with an ending exactly, because life doesn't really end until it ends, but with a resting place, a pause, a breath between chapters. I hope my story has brought you comfort. I hope it's reminded you that you can survive things you think will destroy you, that heartbreak is temporary, even when it feels permanent, that you are stronger than you know, more resilient than you imagine, more complete than you believe. If you're in the thick of it right now, the fresh pain of loss, the raw ache of abandonment, the terrible wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, I want you to know, you will. You absolutely will. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday you'll wake up and realize the pain has dulled, that you can think about what you lost without it breaking you, that you're okay, actually more than okay, that you've grown and changed and become someone you're proud of. The waiting will end, the healing will come, and on the other side, there's a life you can't even imagine, yet full and rich and entirely yours. So rest now. Let my story lull you toward sleep. Let go of whatever you're holding too tightly. Trust that time will do its work, that you will survive, that tomorrow will come, and you will be okay. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Feel yourself held by this moment, by the darkness that promises morning, by the knowledge that you are not alone in your pain. We've all been here. We've all survived. And you will too. Sleep well, dear heart. Sleep deeply. Sleep peacefully. And when you wake tomorrow, remember, you are enough. You always were. And the best of your story is still being written. Good night.